A gute Woche and Bruchim Habayim. Welcome to the international Farbrengen, in which Chassidim, Shluchim, Anash, and all of Klal Yisrael are uniting tonight for the next 24 hours to charge ourselves up and rededicate every part of our lives to hear and internalize the Rebbe's call on the day of Chav Ches Nisan, where the Rebbe empowered each and every one of us to see ourselves as key players in bringing about Gilui HaMashiach, the Geula HaMitis VaShlema. It's Motzei Shabbos customary to start with the Chassidish Maaseh. The Chassid, the great Chassid of Tzvi Dessner, who was a Chassid of the Alter Rebbe, came to Liadi and he went into Yechidus to the Alter Rebbe. And it was a lengthy Yechidus during which the Alter Rebbe walked out for a few moments and he noticed on the desk of the Alter Rebbe, the clock was a bit off. He looked at his wristwatch and it wasn't accurate. His wristwatch was set on the watchtower in the center of Peterburg, and the clock on the Alter Rebbe's desk wasn't the accurate time. He was kind enough to switch and change the time on the Alter Rebbe's desk. Shortly thereafter, the Alter Rebbe came back into the room and noticed the clock. It was off. And the Alter Rebbe looked up at the Chassid and said, the clock at my desk is set at the Tzirufei Shem Havaya, the way it is in heaven. And that is the accurate time. When we live throughout our day-to-day experiences, there are times that we can get distracted. We can set our clock, set the state of being, our state of minds, as indicated by the watchtower in the center of our city, whether it's Times Square, Trafalgar Square, Eiffel Tower, Big Ben in England, whatever it is, that may define our reality. Today is the time when we all look at our watches and we make sure that our clocks are in tune with the clock on the Rebbe's desk. The clock on the Rebbe's desk clicks, ticks. It's a moment closer to Gilui HaMashiach. Higiyazman Geulaschem, and every minute it only charges it stronger and stronger because it is a minute closer to Gilui HaMashiach. And this is the purpose of tonight's Farbrengen, that we strengthen ourselves, not only to set our own individual clocks, but recognize that Rebbe charged us with the responsibility to make sure that the clock in Times Square will reflect the clock on the Rebbe's desk. The clock in the watchtower in every corner of the world will ring the same tune, the tune that Geula is real and it's here and it's now. We begin this Farbrengen with hearing the words of the Rebbe, directly in which the Rebbe set the tone for our mission, the call of the hour. We will now hear the Sikh of Chav Ches Nisan.
Wie kommt es, als die Kleinen sich zusammen, 10 Lieden zusammen, und es gucken, wie ich habe alle Unionen, was noch nicht herausgebracht, marschieren. Ich habe da, Pri, eine Muren, klar und klar. Und danach will ich kommen zu gehen und luften nach Svores, es wird noch eine Scheibe, mit noch ein Jena verbringen, wir müssen das noch einmal verschreiben, danach ist es ein Medium. In das Halten und Gedenken, was verschrieben geworden, und dabei bleibt es, und Rachman al-Islam ist das Recht, also Hein Banach soll noch nicht kommen, Moschiach, und es Recht, also morgen soll noch nicht kommen, Moschiach, und übermorgen sollten nicht kommen, Moschiach. Und es hat Freitag, und es heißt, man soll schreien auf Mose, Hulu, einmal wohl geschrien mit Hanemes, wohl gemeint mit Hanemes, ist eine sichere Sache, als Moschiach wollte schon lange gekommen, zusammen mit der Geula HaMitis VaShlema. Was ich kann noch tun, du weiß ich nicht. Warum alles, was ich getan, bis ist der Hevel, weil Lorik, sie gar nicht verreisen von mir geblieben in Golus. Und was noch mehr, mir ist geblieben mit der Gol in den Golus, Pnim Echet, wenn geht zu Avedes Hashem, und kommt über Kama Pomin. Mir wird eins gesagt, was ich kann noch tun, gibt das über jeden von euch und tut alles, was ihr kennt und seht, herabbringen, Maschinen, denke von Yad Mamosh in der Neben, die Unionen, Tage von Eris, die Teo, aber in Kehlen die Tikkun, und wir hier rotzen nach Sovkov, sollen sich gefühlen 10 Nieden, was werden sich einnackschen und sagen, dass sie muss nicht werden. Bei den Nebensten ist das damals das Amt Schejerefu, wie so lacht zu laben, Nenu, Chatesenu, und Chaltonu, ist eine sichere Sache, der Nebensten wird darauf bringen, der Gula Amitis war schlimm und Teke von Miyad Mamos, und auf eine Meise, was sich kann noch tun in dem, auf zu geben, machen jeden von nachher verschlicht auf Zdoke, und wir hier rotzen, aber ich habe dann alles, was ich kenne, und ich kann nur haben, tut alles, was sie kennt, und wir hier rotzen, also unser Gefühl zwischen nach Alkoholpanel 1, 2, 3, was soll nicht zu geben, was man soll tun, und was man soll tun. Weet we hoe ik wat me zal uitspielen und soll sein Teke von mir Mama schon mit der Simcha betuvli wo.
During the next 24 hours, we are privileged by the efforts of America's 302, the great Achfani of tonight's Farbrengen, and the Mashiach office, who have put together a very, very rich program in the choice of Mechanchim Mashpiyim and Rabbanim who will address this Farbrengen. It would be worthwhile for everyone to keep a notepad near you. We will be hearing wonderful, wonderful ideas, thoughts, inspiration to jot down notes so that we can live it and really internalize it. We begin this grand 24-hour Farbrengen with being honored by one of the greatest speakers, educators, lecturers throughout the world, very well known amongst Anash, Rav Sheis Taub.
Thank you, Rabbi Ginsburg. It's an honor to be part of this 24-hour global Farbrengen again. And it's also an honor that they gave me the opening spot. And I was told, I asked the organizers, how much of last year's program was repeated. They said, no, we tried to shake it up and do new things. The only 2 things that are the same from last year is Rabbi Ginsburg's the first MC and I'm the first speaker. So I guess we did okay. But maybe I'm gonna make it my goal that if I didn't say anything radical enough last year to get me not invited back this year, I think I'm gonna try this year to say things radical enough that will get me not invited back next year. And I'm not saying that to be glib or funny or shocking. I'm saying that because, I mean, we just watched the video of the Rebbe speaking, and the urgency and the tone that this is something that is so desperately, critically necessary for us to step up and do. It's you watch it and you can't help but to shudder. And it's clear that Rebbe there is not asking for us to do the same old, same old. That Rebbe is asking, demanding, pleading, if we can say that we need to really do something difficult and new and innovative and daring and bold. So I'm going to try to set the tone, and I'm going to, at the risk of being a little bit too radical and at the risk of being not invited back, at the risk of getting criticism, you know what? So be it. But I think we need to shake things up. So let me tell you my thoughts. It happens to be Bashgacha Pratis, and nothing just happens to be Bashgacha Pratis, that we're gathering today, and it's Aleph de Reish Chodesh Iyar. It's the first day of the 2-day Reish Chodesh of Iyar, which is the anniversary of the Rebbe launching the 12 Psukim. The Rebbe rolled out the 12 Psukim at 2 occasions. The Farbrengen of Aleph de Reish Chodesh Iyar, that with the year being Tafshin Lamed Vav, 1976, the spring of 76. And then 18 days or 19 days later at the Lag BaOmer rally. So the first 6 of the 12 Psukim were brought out at the Farbrengen Aleph de Reish Chedesh year, this very day, this day in history. And then 2.5 weeks later at the Lag B'Omer rally, the Rebbe put out 6 more psukim. In fact, you can see pictures of that year's Lag B'Omer rally. They only had posters for the first 6 psukim because they didn't know there were going to be more psukim. And the format of the 12 psukim, the 6 and the 6, is the same. In the first 6, you have, the reason you have 6 is you have 2 scriptural verses, meaning psukim of Tanakh, and then you have 2 Maimorei Chazal sayings of Chazal, the sages, and then you have 2 lines from Tanya. And then in the second 6, you have exactly the same structure. You have, again, 2 psukim of Tanakh, you have 2 Maimorei Chazal, and you have 2 lines from Tanya. And the 2 lines from Tanya from the second group of 6, which were, as I mentioned before, rolled out on Lag B'Omer, so they're both from Perek Lamed Gimel, because as the Rebbe said, Lamed Gimel is Lag, is 33, is Lag B'Omer. So I think every Lubavitcher knows what the 12 psukim are. But if you ask a Lubavitcher, what are these psukim? Why did the Rebbe choose these psukim? Why not other psukim? What makes these psukim the ones that the Rebbe wanted that we should teach to children? And I've actually asked people this question, and people will tell you, well, these are the Yesodis of Yiddishkeit, or these, you know, the fundamental ideas, like a Rambam's Yud Gimel Ikrim, so to speak. But that's not what the Rebbe said, actually. That's not actually what the Rebbe said. The Rebbe actually, very actually consistent with the Rebbe's style, explained his methodology. The Rebbe was always explaining. The Rebbe could have said, this is my new initiative, and that would have been fine for Chassidim. But the Rebbe was always saying a milsa b'taima, always explaining. And when the 12 psukim came out, the Rebbe explained why these psukim were the 12 psukim. In fact, I'll say something to you that you probably will, I don't know, maybe it'll be shocking to you. The Rebbe said it could be these psukim, or it could be other psukim. The Rebbe said, you can oiskleiben andere psukim. The Rebbe gave permission to the Chassidim. If you don't want to use these psukim, you could choose other psukim, as long as they have the same inhalt, as long as they have the same teichen. Meaning it wasn't the psukim, it wasn't the oisius, the words, it was the content, it was the message. Okay, now we're getting closer to what it really was about. What about the message? Why these 12 messages? Now we're realizing it's not just the words, it's not just the letters, it's ideas. Okay, what about these 12 ideas? So the Rebbe said very clearly, the 12 psukim was all part of a whole initiative that year in 1976 of chinuch, shnas hachinuch. And something very interesting that Rebbe said, which is a radical idea, absolutely radical, is that the idea of chinuch, or at least the Rebbe's idea of chinuch, is not that Mivtza Chinuch, the education campaign, is a campaign to educate children. It's not. What else could it be? But rather, said the Rebbe, it is a campaign to turn children into educators. Mivtza Chinuch is not a campaign to educate children. It's a campaign to turn children into educators. In fact, somebody, I don't know who it was rubbed the wrong way by that. They thought that was just too out of the box, and they wrote to the Rebbe and said, "This is wild. This is wild stuff." And the Rebbe spoke about it at the Yud Beis Tammuz Farbrengen that year. Okay, so we're talking about a few months after the psukim were launched, and somebody wrote to the Rebbe and said, "Where do you get this crazy idea of turning children, little babies, into the leaders, the influencers, the educators? Where do you get stuff? Well, you can't just make stuff up." So you can look at the Hanacha from the Farbrengen. It's absolutely delicious. So the Rebbe lays out the whole criticism. Somebody wrote to me, and this is what they said. And then the Rebbe said, essentially, I'm surprised this person was not aware of the precedent upon which the existence of our entire Torah has reached us today. The fact that we have Judaism today is only because of a story. It's a story told in the Gemara in Bava Metzia of Reb Chia. Kama Gadol Ma'aser Reb Chia. How great was the act performed by Reb Chia? What did Reb Chia do? The Tana Reb Chia. That at a time when Torah was going to be forgotten, he got children together and he taught one of 5 children each one of the Chumash. And then he taught one of 6 children each a Seder of Mishnayos. And then he made each one a master in their subject. You are the master of Sefer Bereshis, and you're the master of Seder Zroim. And each one of them mastered a Chumash or a Seder of Mishnah. And then they taught each other. And with this system and style being perpetuated exponentially, Reb Chia restored the entire Torah to Klal Yisrael. So the Rebbe said, you're asking me, where am I getting crazy new innovations like making children the educators of Klal Yisrael? We only have a Judaism today because children were the educators of Klal Yisrael. So the Rebbe said, the reason the 12 psukim were chosen, meaning on what basis were these psukim and Maimorei Chazal and passages of Tanya chosen? On the basis that these messages were deemed such messages that children would be able to understand well enough to teach. To teach. The entire purpose and the basis upon which the 12 psukim were chosen was that they were messages that the Rebbe deemed were ones that children could understand well enough to teach. The 12 psukim were, call it an arsenal of weapons for children to bring out into a war of perfecting and purifying and making holy the entire world. I mean, this is before Tivas Hashem, so the military mashal that I'm using is a few years early. But think about it like this. These are the tools. The tools for what? The tools for what? For being educators. So the 12 psukim, the anniversary of which is right now, Aleph Deresh Chedesh Iyar, was all about empowering even little children should be teachers and educators and influencers. Sounds so radical, but like everything with the Rebbe is both completely radical and completely traditional at the same exact time. Just like this thing. It's nobody does it. Nobody even thinks to do it. When you say to do it, it makes everyone uncomfortable. But when they challenge you, you're like, look in the books. Chia did this 2,000 years ago. This is the basis of all Yiddishkeit. Here's what I'm saying. You say Chof Ches Nissen, the Rebbe was pleading with us, please, guys, a little initiative, a little, get motivated, like figure out why this is important to you. Come on, think, come up. The Rebbe said maybe 1 or 2 will come up with an eitzah, figure it out. That wasn't out of the blue and it wasn't out of nowhere. The Rebbe was asking even that the little children should learn how to think for themselves and learn how to carry a message and communicate a message long before Chof Ches Nissen. It wasn't a surprise. It wasn't out of the blue. But what did the Rebbe get? And I want to be careful. I said I'm going to try to be radical, but I don't want to be too radical. The Rebbe asked for 12 ideas that children could learn and internalize so deeply that they'd be able to teach them to their friends. In fact, the Rebbe there in the Farbrengen paints a picture. The Rebbe can paint a picture, I'll tell you. The Rebbe paints a picture. Little children are playing with their friends, and they've been learning these psukim, and they're so inspired by the messages of these psukim. The children can't help, they can't hold themselves back, but to share the ideas with their friends as they're playing. That was the picture that Rebbe painted. That was the Rebbe's vision. That's what the Rebbe asked for. What did the Rebbe get? Memorization. Now, I'm not criticizing it. It's holy, and you see it. That at the rallies, the Rebbe said along, I'm psukim bal peh. Not putting it down. I'm just saying it's interesting. When the Rebbe came out with the psukim, he said you could even choose other words. It's not the words. You can always type under psukim. You could choose other words. I'm not married to the words. It's the messages. These messages were chosen because they're messages that children can't understand well enough to teach. So the Rebbe was asking for children to understand things so well that they could teach it and explain it and articulate it eloquently in a child's vocabulary and a child's style, obviously, kol chad lefi shurei dilei, appropriate to a child. But the Rebbe was asking that children should understand something so well, they should be able to explain it. That's what the Rebbe asked for. What did the Rebbe get? More memorization, more memorization. And you ask the child to tell you what the pasuk means, and he doesn't know. I'm asking us collectively, if we take it seriously, Mashiach, the Rebbe's call, that we need to shake something up, we need to do something new, we need to figure it out and get out of Golus already. Are we willing to challenge certain institutional assumptions that we're comfortable with? Certain ideas about the way that children are educated by parents and by teachers. And I'm not bashing the system. I've been accused of being anti-system. Chas v'shalom, I'm not anti-system. There are incredible meisters, and there are incredible educators and menalim and menahalois. There are incredible people who are involved in the education of our children. I don't want to, God forbid, to sound like I'm bashing. What I'm saying is, if you're looking for a place where to be radical and innovative, let's look right under our nose, our children. Are we ready to be radical and innovative in their education and arm them and teach them how to think? You know, I just came out from a 30-day hachana for the Rebbe's birthday, for Yud Aleph Nisan. Baruch Hashem, we did this 30 letters in 30 days. And every day we learned one of the letters from Igros Chelik Yud. And people were really, I'm talking about Chassidim, Spitz Chabad, like the Rebbe used to call them. They were asking me before it launched, they said, how are you gonna do 30 days of learning Igros? What do you do? You just open Shalom Avracha, Brooklyn, New York. Like, what are you reading? I said, what am I reading? You don't know how much depth, how much scholarship, how much creativity, how much a totally different worldview you can pick up from learning Igros. And they're saying, no, I never heard of learning Igros. I don't know. You don't learn the Igros. Baruch Hashem, people learned with me for 30 days before Yud Aleph Nisan, and you learned the Igros. And I said time and time again that the point is not necessarily entirely what the Rebbe said, it's how the Rebbe said it. It's not what the Rebbe said, it's how the Rebbe said it. In other words, what the Rebbe said, that was to an individual. At that time, in that place, with those circumstances, coming from that background, with their entire life story leading up to the moment in which they wrote to the Rebbe. So what the Rebbe said, maybe it's not a klal gola b'Torah. Maybe it's very specific. And the Rebbe actually says that many times in Igros, that there are no klalim when it comes to yonim nafshim, when it comes to personal issues, people, everyone's different. Everyone is a unique creation of God. So it's not necessarily universal what the Rebbe said. But what's life-changing is to open yourself up to how the Rebbe said it. The Holech Yelich, the Derech Halimud. You want to use a more Lomdish expression, the Derech Halimud. The Rebbe has a way of deconstructing a question. The Rebbe has a way of approaching a problem. The Rebbe has a way of putting people at ease. The Rebbe has a way of encouraging people. The Rebbe has a way of restoring people's hope. The Rebbe has a way of being an optimist and a realist at the exact same time. The Rebbe has a style. And it's not enough to just quote what words the Rebbe said. I'm not chas v'shalom putting it down. Divrei Arav, the oisius, the holiness of the letters, the words, and learning chassidus bal peh. That's all important, incredibly important. But it's not enough, because you're not going to figure out an eitzah how to do what the Rebbe is asking you to do if all you can do is repeat what the Rebbe already said. The Rebbe was begging us to be creative. That's the Rebbe wanted the ha'aris. The Rebbe would always ask for scholarly articles. After every Rashi Sikha, the Rebbe was looking, where are the Chassidim going to write up the articles? I gave them klolei Rashi. What do you think? A Rashi Sikha, is the Rebbe showing off his lumdus to show off how the Lubavitcher Rebbe can learn a Rashi? The point was to give you tools. Now you learned the Rashis that I didn't teach. And it's not just with Chumash Rashi, it's with everything. It's with politics in the Middle East, and it's about Shalom Bayis, and it's about how to bring Mashiach. But what do we do? What do we do? Short answer tests that test children on retention, how much they can cram for a test, and how much they can regurgitate information. It's not enough. The Rebbe wants creative thinkers, innovative thinkers. People who know not only what the Rebbe said, but can think how the Rebbe taught us how to think. You know, everyone did Pirkei Avos today. It's a Dvar Mishnah, first Mishnah in Avos. Says the Anshe Knesset Gedela told us, Hamidu Talmidim Harbe. What's the Rebbe's diuk? Hamidu, stand up. Stand up. Lots of students. So the Rebbe said, Hamidu, stand them up. That means they can't just be people parroting what they heard from the Rav. They have to be creative. They have to know how to take it and run with it and to say something new and innovative. When the Rebbe is saying, don't just repeat what I told you to say something new, figure out something new. What does that mean? The Rebbe is standing us up to be creative and innovative, to take some initiative. One of the letters we learned, the 30 letters, someone wrote to the Rebbe and said, I want to get involved in Chabad activities. Tell me what to do. And the Rebbe told him, I don't know what to do. You tell me what to do. I'm not there. You'll figure it out. Kabbalah soil is beautiful. Being a soldier is beautiful. The Rebbe wants both. The Rebbe wants both. A Yid is nimna mim nois. We can do both. But it's not enough just to be obedient. It's not just the nasa. It's also the nishma, which means we have to think like the Rebbe's Chassidim, and we have to see things creatively. We have to see opportunities, and we have to do new things. And that's what the Rebbe was begging us to do. Chof Nissen. The Rebbe spoke 40 years after Yud Shvat, but the Maimer Chazal, like Koi Inish Adaiti the Rabbe Adarboyim Shnin. The Rebbe made a few diukim. One of them, the word koi means to stand up, like we were saying before. Amidu Talmidim Harbe. That what is the end game here? It's not just the Talmidim know what the Rebbe already said, but they absorb the Rebbe's approach so thoroughly that they're now standing. They're standing like competent thinkers who know how to figure out answers to questions that the Rebbe didn't explicitly give them. Everyone's struggling for guidance. What would the Rebbe say? What would the Rebbe? There's so many new things since Gimel Tammuz. What would the Rebbe say? The Rebbe didn't give enough of his holy time teaching us how to think. The Rebbe didn't give us enough tools to be able to figure things out. If it doesn't say it explicitly in the Sichas or in the Igris or the Maimarim, so use the tools. Figure out the Rashi that the Rebbe didn't teach, and figure out the answers to the questions, the burning questions of today, that the Rebbe didn't tell us explicitly. The Rebbe gave us a comprehensive worldview. What are we afraid of? That people will actually become independent thinkers? If that's what's holding up Mashiach, that we're afraid that people will think too much, be too creative, take too much initiative, show too much of their personalities, and we have to squash that. For what purpose? To retain the Gullus and push off Geula? I said I'm not going to be too radical, but I'm going to push the line. I think it behooves all of us to be honest and to say, if this is what's holding it back, if this is the last thing that needs to be done, let's do it already. What's the big deal? What's the big deal? Let's challenge some basic assumptions about how our children are educated. And by the way, I'm not anti-educator. You ask the educators themselves, the majority of them will agree with me and say, yes, 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 and yes. Yes, 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 and yes. We need children who can think for themselves. I don't want to ever hear again somebody tell me that I learned how to think for myself by going to college. You don't know what a tragedy that is? Somebody who learns Chassidus Chabad, especially the Rebbe's Chassidus, which is so analytical and so layered, should master critical thinking. Should master critical thinking. Should be somebody who's creative and able to figure anything in the world out. Because the Rebbe's worldview is so comprehensive and so deep and so nuanced and so layered. A lot of people are going to come on tonight And they're going to say very inspirational things, much more inspirational than me. I'm not Mr. Inspiration. But if you're feeling inspired, what I want you to think about, maybe to consider where to channel that inspiration, do something radical with the education of your child so that your child can think originally and creatively and with nuance and be able to sustain contradiction and paradox in the way that the Rebbe taught us how to do it. Are we willing to try it? What are we risking? What are we afraid of risking? There's nothing, there's no risk. We have nothing to lose and only everything to gain. God bless you and your children and the meisters and the teachers and the students and all of us. Let's make the Rebbe proud. Let's really, really show the Rebbe that we soaked in the Rebbe's teachings and we know how to think. We know how to think like the Rebbe's, I don't want to say Talmidim, but the Rebbe's children. We know how to think like the Rebbe's children.
Yashikeach, Rabbi Tal, for your very powerful words said, B'chol atzmeisei temarna. It's clearly Dvarim hayetzim min halev, and will definitely have a powerful impact on all. We will now hear the Sikha of the Rebbe from Purim Toshim Mem Zayin, in which the Rebbe speaks very clear words, how each and every one b'direinu, anoshim, noshim v'taf, are charged and empowered with the ability, responsibility, and ability to bring about the Geula.
Nisiderenu gemacht a ganze Studien von Lealter Lishuve, Lealter Geula. Und das ist gemacht, kommt bedient mit der Studie. Und das ist geheißen Notdrücken, geheißen Mefi sein und gab der Fall die Schwierigkeiten, was man dem Mann gemacht, wo Nachfolgebeginn ist er dann noch umgegangen, der Wind hat es geheißen Notdrücken, gedehnt, soll bleiben, man soll das lernen, la delis haboi machen. Steht das mit dem ganzen Teke. Bei mir wird sich noch stürender die Scheilat Moser. Wo gefragt hat, das wird sich wegen der Käse von der Sidereine. Und sind jenen Käse schon durchgegangen, sämtliche Jahre. Gesucht, wo der Vorteppes an Bio, das war der einzige Bio, was ich gefunden habe, Israel, das ein Scheich ist, von Hanossi, Hu Hakeil, darf das Sibir gehen zu Hakeil, darf das Sibir geben zu jeder Rieden bifne Yatzme. Pschaße gewähren Hanossi, Hu Hakeil und alle seien dann gewähren übergegeben für Chulu, hat nicht gekonnt, damit Jäze sein. Und Nachfall Pekin hat das nicht herausgebracht, den Befehl. Befall, Beschaße geworden, die Erides Adelis. Achscher Dore Bitmi. Und zusammen damit ist aber geworden, nennte zu dem Mieter und zu dem Achischeno, weil Mewai Baruch in Scheire Ehle, in Sof und Drusche Purim, ist auch damals geworden, noch mehr der Hechlich, aber man muss ihn drauf tun. Nur wenn der mir sagt, habe ich Chance, wegen drauf, wer sie soll nicht tun. Muss man mit Farsim sein, bei Jesser Reis und bei Jesser Reis. Als jeder soll wissen, als durch sein ein und einzigen Meister und der sein ein und einzigen Divu und der sein ein und einzigen Machschove soll wissen sein, als Rettig wegen Jikvis in dem Schiche. Und nie in der Ruf Gufi Jikvis in dem Schiche. Und nun der Ruf Gufi dort der Psag Din von Nevi Schuhe war Zolle Beilom und der Pfui noch zugekommen. Damals hat gekonnt, jetzt sein, mit dem Business, Sidereno, befragt hat es gegeben, nach Kerz. Beschaßt man aber gesehen, der Kerz von damals ist näher durchgegangen, nach Siris, Baschonin, ist ein Dover Bohrer, die einzige Sache, was mir darf Maschlim sein, jeder soll wissen, dass es sein, ihnen a Proti, auf Mikaim sein, oder die Aloch in Rambam, man hat mich in Breve nicht, muss man halten in ein Tummeln in dem. Aber man soll wissen sein, wegen Keizim, man soll wissen sein, wegen Jemesa Moschiach, und man soll wissen sein, da alle Proten, was und man soll wissen sein, der Rieker, was nicht, da jene, was steht, nicht ins Vorhin. Das meint man und das meint man nie, Und das meint man annoschen, wir noschen, bei je Nechon, alle zusammen, Kol Godel.
L'chaim, let's remember it's a Farbrengen. When Kulanu Ke'echad is an opportune time to ask for Barcheinu Avinu, the Rebbe once said at the beginning of Farbrengen to include all of Klal Yisrael, that L'chol B'nei Yisrael Ye'er B'meshveisam. The Rebbe insists that in the final moments of Golus, by Mitzrayim, it was already L'chol B'nei Yisrael, so too now every Yid, every home should be filled with Eir, Gashmi, Veruchni, B'milui, Mishalis, Levav Kol Echad, Ve'echad Mi'Yisrael, L'Tev of L'Vracha, B'Tev Hanir V'Anigla, and the Iker, we should all see, take from Yad Mamish, the Geula Amitis V'Ashleima now. We're now privileged to hear from the Manal of the Tzedakah of the Rabbeim, Manal of Kel Chabad, Rav Reb Shalom Duchman, who will join us now in this Farbrengen.
Good Ayashikeyach to the organizers for organizing this great thing. I know for me personally, this in itself, just in preparing for tonight, it gives us the opportunity to think about and to connect to this overwhelming time of Chavchas Nisan. And the central question again is, so what's that the pshat? Ich gebe das über zu euch. What does that mean? The Rebbe gives it over to us. The Rebbe was a very, very practical person, very optimistic, but nevertheless very, very practical. And he assesses the situation. He knows the situation. He knows about each one of us, where we are, what we are, from the Rebbe's perspective. And certainly from our perspective, Yodi Inish Benafshe, where he is, what he is. And then we come along and we say that how do we approach it? What's the practical approach? And we're not just talking about the simple aspect of our life. We're talking about something that's central, the central theme, the central focus, the eyeball of Chassidus, of creation, the Nekudi Ikris, Mashiach. So really, how do we approach it? What's the approach? And in thinking about it, I thought that the Rebbe gave us the message right there himself. The Rebbe said, Ich gib das euch. If we connect that the reason we're doing it is because the Rebbe gives it, because the Rebbe has the faith in us, because the Rebbe wants it, and of course the Rebbe is with us, and it's then we're going with the Koyach of the Rebbe, Ich gib das euch, then to jeden einem, so then we can go along and then we can go along and we can take the challenge. Tashon Amid Vav, I had the chus to be one of the shluchim in Eretz Yisrael. On Chalamayat Pesach, I was in the home of the Bishra Rebbe Barav Shalom in Kfar Chabad, and he got a telephone call from Rabbi Chadikov. And the telephone was that the Rebbe asked and gave over to the Bishra Rebbe, the head of Tzachdan, the head of the Shluchim then, that there should be a big shturem in the story about Sudas Mashiach. And the Rebbe then spoke, and the Rebbe said, the Ursprach is sein business of klingen in the Gassen Parmenishon Mashiach. Until it will ring in the streets, the bells of Mashiach. And the Rebbe then went on to him, and the Rebbe told him that since there is the Shluchim there, we just came to the Tzaslar 2 months before Pesach, we came to the Arab Shvat. And the Shluchim, the Rebbe says, were here last year by the Farbrengen of Lachen Shal Pesach. So B'meila, they should be in charge, they should be the head, because being that they were here by the Farbrengen here, so they know Sudas Mashiach, they understand Mashiach, their connection to Mashiach. I don't remember the exact language, but that was the point. The point was that the atmosphere of Mashiach, you were able to live if you were there by the Farbrengen of Lachen Shal Pesach. And yes, we were by the Farbrengen of Lachen Shal Pesach. And those of us who remember how the Rebbe inspired us, and when you were there by the Farbrengen, you felt how the Rebbe is trying to lift us up, to inspire us, and to bring us into the taste of Mashiach. Of course, the question is, that was then. How do we connect with it right now? We're after Gimel Tammuz. And the Rebbe said that gave us the remedy immediately. The Shabbos after, the Rebbe said that what he meant, how do we get in, how do we do it? We're winning the Torah of Mashiach, we're winning the Yura. What the Torah of Mashiach? Torah of Mashiach is the Rebbe's Torah, that's the Torah of Mashiach. Connecting to the Rebbe, doing what the Rebbe wants. This is exactly how we connect. This is the inspiration. Ich gib das Eich. If we connect in the Eifin that we take it from Ich gib das Eich, then we can do it. I heard the story, Rabbi Malke, from Rabbi Abba Refson. Rabbi Abba Refson told me that he heard the story from the Bala Maisa himself. There was one of the Bachrim in 770, that was a Bachar, he was a very, very good Bachar. And then he got married. And then he was a little bit of drop, went off a drop, not in a major way. He was in the construction business. And for a few months that he didn't come to 770, a few months he didn't come to the Rebbe. He felt, being that he was in the construction business, he was dirty, so he didn't feel comfortable to work at the 770. And he got once an urge that he wants to go into 770, he wants to see the Rebbe. So he decided he'll stand by Mincha after the Rebbe went from his room, the Rebbe from the Zal, the Rebbe went back to his room. He'll stand there in the back, there'll be people in front of him. People usually would line up to say goodbye, and he'd be able to see the Rebbe, and hopefully he didn't think, he was hoping that the Rebbe would not see him. The Rebbe walked out from Mincha, and the Rebbe stopped, and the Rebbe calls him, the Rebbe says, Wo bist du? He didn't understand. So Rabbi Groner repeats to him and says, the Rebbe is asking you where you are. So he says, Ich bin da, I'm here. So the Rebbe says, Mi zede nicht, I don't see you. He was a little bit too tumult. He says, Rebbe, ich bin schmutzig, I'm dirty. He was in the construction business. So the Rebbe told him, Zu mir kannst du kommen, azay wie du bist. To me, you can come the way you are. And just thinking about yes, of course. But the Rebbe should have said, Bamir bist du gut, azay wie du bist. The answer is, mis nicht gut, azay wie du bist. Zu mir kannst du kommen, azay wie du bist. If you make the move, if you go into the Rebbe, and you connect to the Rebbe's vision, and then Yamut has to come, no matter how you are, every little one with this little thing, if you connect as Ich give the Saich, then we can do it. The famous story with the Baal Shem Tov, with the Kukuriku, famous story, the Baal Shem Tov was davening, and was in Kippur, with the Kavanas, and he couldn't be pale Yeshua for the Gzeila, and there was a farmer's child that loved Kukuriku, and he came in and he screamed at Kukuriku. And a very simple question. The next day, instead of sitting working and welding and doing chassidus and davening, they should have screamed Kukuriku. It's such a great thing, or take the word that you like. The answer is a very simple answer. Kukuriku is Kukuriku. When you scream Kukuriku by the Baal Shem Tov, when the Baal Shem Tov is davening around with the chassidim, the Baal Shem Tov's Kukuriku, that goes to the heavens. When you're in the atmosphere of the Baal Shem Tov, when you're together with the Baal Shem Tov. And this is the pshat that this is Ich Gibes Take Eich, but this is Ich Gibes Hashem, it's connected to Eich. Learning the Maimodi from the Rebbe, especially the Maimodi Yesod, the basic Maimodi from the Rebbe, the Maimah from Darif Nissen, Tavshon Amedarif, and then Yosef Malkabi, Masht Osir, learning the Maimah of the Gimel Tammuz from the Alta Tzava. In many Maimodim and many Sichos, you always see the Rebbe, the question, how does it start? Does it start from the Maila? Does it start from the Mata? Does it start because what the Eibishter gives you, or does it a part of Avedas HaTachtenim? And how does it work? And if it's Avedas HaTach from one side, if it comes from Maila, so then you get a lot. You get a tremendous amount, a tremendous channel of bracha. If you start with the Mata, it's very limited, but then it's yours. It permeates you. It's you. So how does it work? And usually, in most of the cases, and the end result that the Rebbe says is that the Eibishter, it starts from the Mata, but it's not because of the Mata. It's because the Eibishter chose that he accepts and he wants and he's getting his tainug from the Mata. It's not that the Mata is meaning. Of course the Mata is meaning, but why is the Mata meaning? Not because of the Mata. The matter is meaning what he does is important. Why? Because that's why the Eibishter chose. And this is exactly what's the difference. The difference is a very simple thing. If it comes with Sadru Maila, so then you have to do big things. If you're telling me that the reason why it's important is because the Rebbe chose it, because the Eibishter chose it, so then even a small thing, every little thing that you do, and you do it because the Rebbe chose it, because you connected to the Rebbe, so then you're doing big things. If you can connect as Ich Gib das Eich, with every little thing that you do, you're connected to the Rebbe, and you're fulfilling you're fulfilling this mission. I want to finish with a very, very powerful story that I heard. I heard it from Dr. J.P. Moore, which is an incredible story, just using the platform. Dr. J.P. Moore is the head of the stroke unit in Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. I had the schus to be involved in bringing him to the Rebbe and then driving him many times that we came to the Rebbe back and forth. This year, Rabbi Yael didn't feel well. And Rabbi Khan asked me if I can find a neurologist for him. So I called up Dr. Moore, and I asked Dr. Moore if he can come to Rabbi Yael to evaluate Rabbi Yael. It was during COVID. Dr. Moore was not taking any patients, was not seeing any patients. I started pressuring him, how do I explain to Dr. Moore, to Agoy about Rabbi Yael? How can I explain him? I mean, he knows the Rebbe. He's not a Rebbe, but Rabbi Yael is Rabbi Yael. Anyway, so he understood that he's something important. I wouldn't ask him Mustamazay. I mean, I told him, Dr. Moore, my mother is sick. My mother had a stroke. I would not ask you to come to see my mother. Rabbi Yael, I'm asking you that you should come and see. So he says to me that I can come and see him, but I need to have scans. And for that, you have to bring him to the hospital. Then he says to me, why don't you use your mitzvah tanks that you have, and you have the scanner there? As we all know, that the Tafshin base, I don't know who organized it, but it was done mamish and the item that the Rebbe were able to brought a scanner on a truck, and a mobile scanner, a mobile machine. And he said, so he says, you have your mitzvah tank, you have your way. Anyway, he says, I'll tell you a fascinating story about your mitzvah tanks, he told me. He says to me, I'm a goy. He told me the Russian, I'm an Olotarian. He said, I don't know the exact Russian that he used, Presbyterian, whatever. He says, I had a friend. His friend is not around with us anymore. His friend is Dr. Levine. He was a cardiologist. We were very, very close. And we spoke many times about religion. I spoke to him about the Rebbe. I spoke to him about my visits to the Rebbe, et cetera, et cetera. And he told me that he was a Holocaust survivor. He lived in Vienna together with his wife, who also I met. He told me the name, I don't remember the name. He says, in Vienna, we were engaged to each other. The Nazis came in, and unfortunately, we were separated. But with tremendous miracles, we were connected later back together, and we got married, and we lived in New York, and he was a noted cardiologist in one of the hospitals. He says, but because of what happened and all the trials and tribulations and the trauma of the war, I gave up my Yiddishkeit. I put away, no towers, no film, nothing religious. He says, I'm walking down the street one day in the Lower East Side, and I met my two of your boys. He called Rabbi Dr. Moore, says, he tells me, my two of your boys. And they're there, with the mobile, with the mitzvah tanks, they're there. And they tell me, you want to put on film, and you want to do this religious act. And I said, he said, I respectfully declined. I said, this is not for me, I don't do it. So the boy said, you know what, come inside and drink a cup of coffee. We'll have a cup of coffee together. They came in, they had a cup of coffee, they spoke, and it was very, very nice. He went home, he says, I go home. This Dr. Moore is telling me, I'm going home, I go home. I'm thinking to myself on the way, it would be very, very interesting to know. I used to have a Talis and film. I put it away in the attic. Where is it? What happened to it? Anyway, he comes home and he's looking for it. He asks his wife for it, and he goes up to the attic and he locates. He finds the Talis and film. He brings down the Talis and film. And he's telling this to Dr. Moore. And he says, and I wanted to see, how do I look at it? So I put on the Talis and film. And then he says, I gave a scream out, they got me. He put on the Talis and film. He accomplished what they wanted, influencing. Have a good tavach. Yashikoya for giving me the opportunity to take part in this. The Rebbe should helfen, that the Rebbe should durchführen, seine Sachen, the Rebbe sicher durchführen, and we should all have the chance, each one of us, to have a small part in this. A good tavach.
Yashikoya Rav Duchman, those powerful words, the beautiful stories, and this inspiration will definitely take effect, that we all recognize that we all are key players in bringing about the Rebbe's call, Ich gib das Ibe zu euch. We take a moment to mention the key goal and emphasis of tonight's Farbrengen, in addition to the general hiserus of Ish Yisrael Yazeru Lachav Yemer Chazak, is to bring it down to Peil Mamish. The Rebbe always encourages his Vadius Pi'iles. It should have a Peil Mamish. One of the Peil Mamishes of this Farbrengen, this grand international Farbrengen, is for each and every one of us, whoever is participating, and for us to spread the word, to log on to onemitzvah.org/sign up. And over there, we are all recognizing that we are influencers. It's not about just us taking another mitzvah, which is wonderful. Every mitzvah is a great accomplishment. But the key is that we encourage and inspire others to become influencers. In no time, the impact, the power of each and every one of us reaching out to as many as we can. And the goal is really as many as we can to sit down and think, who else can I inspire? Who else can I make, turn them into an extended yad, extended hand of the Rebbe doing the shlichus, of reaching out and turning on more and more neshamas. This is the time where we all want to invest everything we can, going through our lists and encouraging and inspiring that we create teams and pages that will only grow and expand. Before the end of this Farbrengen, we can already have an influence on unimaginable numbers. So take the moment to log in, onemitzvah.org/sign up, and let's get the ball rolling. So during the Farbrengen, we can see how this keeps on growing. We will now hear a sikh of the Rebbe, Yutes Kislev Tavshin Mem Vav, in which the Rebbe clearly tells us the infinite powers, the ability that lies within each and every one of us.
Azafal piva das is a dover mugbal und suyam modu du mugbal. Und Konger sein als gar in am Madim in ehrlich reiche wie eimek hachiktane. Is in nem do in Joni, was sie seine verbunden mit den Seif. Wie mir selbst was beim Juchot mit Kufaseinu zu, wo sie Tage Rabbas haben Humeis und Tischtusch Hagvulim. Biachad im See hat mir sich erklau, als sie wie es Barru, wie es Labnu, wie es Starfu hat wurde, als sie wird nennter zu Bias Meshiach Zitkenu, wo demult wir sein der Reben bimilue noch mehr wie Bishas Habrio, Eile Teile Smole, Teile Speres. Wer teichet Nisgale in Yonim Chadoshim und Protim Chadoshim in Eilem Hazeh Agashmi, bis in Eilem Hazeh Achumri, bis wanita das wird Eich Nimshach in Chochmis Chitzenies, כמבואר בזהר, אז von Schnaas 6 Mejes, und wie der Seher tatscht das so, von Schnaas 6 Mejes lebe Faschishi, is demot nivku mayonis rabbis und varubis hashamayim niftochu, אז viele Ravje, viele kleine in Chochmas Atero, wer bazeechet nicht Tesaf Chochmas, בחוכמה שלהם, אף על פי וזה עניין, לפי שויז, in עניונים חיצוניים, על כל פנים חיצוניים, בערך התורה ומצוות ישראל. ודוס איזר דפנים ישראל. ובמזרתוס דווקא בימינו אלו, בדרסנו אלו, ושנסגר geworden, אז in העניין, was בקמוס, das הכי קוטן, ובדרך שלפני זה, hat na Fakamus getan von a Dover Gashmi, nicht gelegt kein Nacht und kein Chashivus, dafke durch was in die Teser geworden, Chochmes Chizenis hat Megale geworden, als in Akamus Achik Tana von a Geshem, wird das voneinander geteilt, a Fribu, Chalokim und Protim. Was jeder von sie hat in sich echt kam Protein. Und das wird zusammen nach Keach Achi Adi, was eben nur mehr will, kommen das Eisnutzen, Letev, und Letikun Hoelom, wie man selbst das ist, erreicht bei Pashtus, Davke, bei Deliseno Elu, auf von einer kleinen Kamus begesche, kommen Nufton Gdelis Vachadoshes, in Tikun Hoelom, Bis der Funk kommt a Resatielles Libu Bnei Odom, Afal Piva das a Kamus in Beine, Und die Jeles kommt a reis zu a Ben Nodem und Bnei Yodem, was sie seien in Seichel und Chochma. Und sie haben die, was man pflegt, oder dem Keich, was sie behalten, in dem Kamus Achik Tano.
Spending Pesach here together. At our program, we wanted to do a learning component, and we chose to use the curriculums by Tut Alts. I think that both renditions, the adult and the children's, are terrific.
I think this book makes it relatable in a way that I haven't learned it before, so it's nice to have it laid out clearly.
I like having the book because it's fun to learn.
I like learning from it, and I like new clean books.
Let's take the moment to express our Hakaras HaTov on behalf of Shluchim and Anash the world over for the incredible work that this office, Mashiach office, is doing in Merkez 302 in producing resources, material that makes it much more easier and accessible for all of us to teach, young and old, in Yoni Gula Mashiach, and really live with the message. It's also important, the Rebbe just told us about the advance of technology and the ability that in a short period of time, we can really reach milestones unthinkable in times bygone. And this is an area where every one of us has our social network in which through email or WhatsApps or whatever type of media, let's recognize the power of the messages coming through, inspiring, uplifting, encouraging people with the message of Geula. And it's each and every one of us can use our creativity, what works for our people, our circle of influence, and it has tremendous, tremendous power to really flood the world with the light, with the Eira Geula, the message of Geula. There's a beautiful letter printed in Igros where the Rebbe is writing to one of the earlier Shluchim Askanim in Eretz Yisrael in Tafshi Yudalit, and the Rebbe is telling them the urgency of how we need to recognize how now, specifically after the Hashmodes, and Hine Zei Melech HaMashiach Oimed Al Koslenu, Ve'enei Mechak El L'Siyum HaAvodah HaMuteles Al Dereinu. And relatively, the Rebbe says, it's easier than the Avodah of previous generations. And then the Rebbe adds on this line, Uba'achlota B'teikif Bazeh. If we really resolve firmly, Moitzi Gam Koiches Hanalamim Shaloi Legilui, and you can do much more. You will reveal untapped koiches within you if you only firmly resolve. And the Rebbe adds on that it should be mekuya b'kol echad v'echad, the pizgam of the Baal Shem Tov, that everyone can take out a mitpachas if he means b'emuna, if he means it with emuna pshuta, and lav it a sayam al mitpachas with that emuna, which means the Rebbe is telling us if we only resolve, yes, we're going to do it. And like the Rebbe calls in the Sikh of Chavches Nissen, we have to do it with a akshanis of Ksheyedev. We can do it. And especially when we have the Keiches of the Rebbe, Ir gibt das Iber. Do we question if we are able to do it? And the Rebbe says it's only about the Hachlata Takifa. We are now privileged to hear from one of the great teachers involved in the building the curriculum of JLI, which has a studentship of many, many tens of thousands throughout the world, Rav Naftali Silberberg.
Agad Vach, Agad Chedesh. L'chaim levracha, l'chaim baruch atah adinei le'elam l'chaim shakelni b'dvarei. L'chaim the Farbrengen should be pale, that which is supposed to be pale in us, and the people who will be mashpia and ultimately bring Mashiach, which is the bottom line, which we're all looking for. Chav Ches Nisan Tavshin and Aleph. I was a young bacher at that time here in Crown Heights in New York. Chav Ches Nisan was a Friday, and the Sikha of Chav Ches Nisan, the famous Sikha, was on Thursday night. It was an unexpected Sikha. What's Chav Ches Nisan? Why should there? It's not Epsa Yem de Pagra. It's not a Yem Skula. And punkt, I was that night, that evening. The Rebbe went to the oil that day. The Rebbe went to the oil then every single Monday and Thursday. So the Rebbe went to the oil, and that evening I was in a house here in Crown Heights by one of the mishpachas of Anash. I was in the basement. I was doing some sort of task. And as I'm doing what I'm doing, suddenly I hear from upstairs the Rebbe speaking. This mishpacha, they had a private hookup line, so they had called in just for Maidiv, Tamazeh. And after Maidiv, the Sikha, the Rebbe started speaking, so I quickly went upstairs, and I sat down, and I was a 15-year-old bacher at that time, sitting and listening, and maybe listening is a little of an overstatement. Wasn't my mind was wandering this place and the other place, and the Sikha lasted, if I remember correctly, I don't know, 10 minutes, 12 minutes. And after a few minutes, after 8-9 minutes, suddenly, I chap, the Rebbe screaming about something. I immediately, my ears perk up, and I start listening, and the Rebbe is screaming about Mashiach, Tutat Wasser Kent, with all the different oisius and all the words that by now we're all familiar with. The Sikha finished, I ran off to 770, where the Sikha, or at least that part of the Sikha, the last 3 minutes of the Sikha was playing on a loop, and then the rest of the night was Farbrengen, the entire night was 770, and Al Torah, and the Mesifta, where I was, with our Mashpia. But the Sikha was always, there was like the first 8 minutes, which was I would say the normal Sikha that there was at that time, and then suddenly the Rebbe transitions, and the Rebbe starts talking about Mashiach. Years later, one day I asked myself, like, what was that transition? What was the Rebbe talking about in the beginning of the Sikha? Most of us don't pay attention. Everyone knows the last 3 minutes of the Sikha of Chav Ches Nisan. What were the first 8 minutes of the Sikha? And maybe maybe those for a few minutes also will give us a clue as to why is the Rebbe suddenly getting so excited about Mashiach? What happened on Chav Ches Nisan, Tavshin and Aleph, that suddenly the Rebbe screaming about Mashiach? What's Chav Ches Nisan? So I went back, I learned the Sikha. And it's very interesting. In the Sikha, the Rebbe is talking about the tremendous Maila of Chav Ches Nisan. The Rebbe starts off the Sikha, at least in the Mugidika part. The Rebbe starts off talking about how it's today Chav Ches Nisan is a Yom Zakai, a very special day, benegayah to the Geula. What's so special about Chav Ches Nisan? So the Rebbe explains how the year is a special year, Tavshin and Aleph is a special year, and the Rebbe is Maidach and that. And then the Rebbe talks about how the month is a special month, the month of Nisan. And the day of the month is a special month. Chav Zayin is special, Zach and Chav Ches, the idea of Koyach. And the week is a special week. And the day of the week is a special week. And then in Sfiras HaEmer, the day in Sfiras HaEmer is a special day in Sfiras HaEmer. And after the Rebbe finishes all that, it's such a special day. Sai Mitzad the year, and Sai Mitzad the month, and Sai Mitzad the day of the month, and Sai Mitzad the week, and Sai Mitzad the day of the week, and Sai Mitzad the Sfira. So then the Rebbe says, B'meila. So there's a Tmiya Achi Gedola. B'meila, there's this tremendous wonder. So how is it that on such a special day, when Mashiach from every single side the year, side the month, side the everything. So how you talking? The Mashiach is in there. How you talking that 10 Yidden are gathered together? And by us, it's sirecht. It's not problematic. Mashiach shouldn't come today, shouldn't come tomorrow, shouldn't come the day after. Which is pretty interesting, because the day Chav Ches Nisan, no one over there before the Rebbe walked in through him had any idea that it was special in any which way whatsoever. And suddenly here comes the Rebbe And the Rebbe tells us you should know that today, the day that we're sitting on, even though it seems like a pashta mitzvah, it seems like a simple Thursday, nothing special about it. You should know that there is no more opportune and special and propitious day for Mashiach than there is today. And therefore, there's a Himel Geshrei, because today is so special, Himel Geshrei, Hayitachin Mashiach isn't here, and Hayitachin, that we're all so adish, we're also stoic, and we're cold-blooded when today is the most special day for Mashiach to come. And l'chayra, at least one of the lessons that we can learn from ourselves from this is this idea that every day is like this. If Chav Ches Nisan is a special day, that means that every day is a special day. The Rebbe took a day which seemed to be nothing, and the Rebbe showed how it's the most exciting day for Mashiach. And the lesson the Rebbe is trying to teach us is every single day a chassid wakes up and says, today is a Yom Zakei for Mashiach, and today is a day I have to shturim of Mashiach. And there has to be that constant freshness that a chassid experiences every single day, that every single day waking up and saying, today's a Yom Zakei, what am I doing today to bring Mashiach? Who am I going to be Mashpia and today in the area of Mashiach? But this obviously raises the question, how do we go about that? How do we go about, it's already, it's 31 years since we heard the Sikha of Chav Ches Nisan, and how do we stay fresh? How do we stay fresh with the excitement? There's a story. There was a chassid. Okay, let's backtrack a second. In Tafshin Chav Gimel, which was 150 years from the Histalkus of the Alter Rebbe, so the Rebbe decided to publish a sefer called Sefer HaChasidim, which was an album which contained the names and information of about 3,000 Hasidim. This was an initiative which the Frierdiker Rebbe had started, wanting to create, to publish a book, an album with the names of all the Hasidim. For whatever reason, it didn't come out l'poel in the times of the Frierdiker Rebbe. So the Rebbe restarted it, and at that time, all the Hasidim, every single one of the Hasidim was asked to fill out a card, which, by the way, just recently, I think around 2 years ago, these cards were always kept in the Rebbe's library. Just recently, they were released with a lot of interesting information about a lot of Hasidim. But every Chassid was asked to send in a card with their basic personal information, and from this, in honor of Chav Dalet Tevis of that year, this sefer called Sefer HaChasidim was published. One of the Chassidim who wrote in a card was a Chassid whose name was Rabbi Yaakov Menachem Mendel Sperlin. He's the father, the patriarch of the entire Sperlin Mishpacha in Lubavitch. Today, the different branches of the Sperlin Mishpacha. And he wrote he filled out the card, and then he also added in another paper or two with more personal information. And he wrote an interesting story. So he learned in Temchet Mimim. And then in the early 1920s, after he had already graduated Temchet Mimim, he became a fundraiser for Temchet Mimim. And as he writes it, he did well. He did quite well. He was quite successful in fundraising. And at a certain point in time, was before Pesach of one of the years in the early 1920s, I think maybe it was 1923, that Reb Chatzke Fagin sent him off to the city of Yekaterinoslav to raise money. So he arrives in the city of Yekaterinoslav. That's the city where the Rebbe's father, Reb Levi Yitzchak, was the Rav. And the Rebbe was there also at that time. He actually writes over there that he also heard the Rebbe giving a shir on a certain topic in Ein Yaakov, but he doesn't remember the token of the shir. But what he writes is as follows: that Rabbi Yitzchak invited him to speak and to fundraise in front of the main shul, and he introduced them, and he said a few words before. Rabbi Yitzchak spoke a little before he introduced them, and he said as follows. There's a famous story. It's brought on, part of it is brought on in the Medrash Rabbah, part of it's brought on in the Gemara Masechta Shabbos, about Reb Elazar ben Aruch. Reb Elazar ben Aruch was one of the 5 great Talmidim of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. We're going to be learning about him in Mir Hashem this upcoming Shabbos in Pirkei Avos. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 Talmidim, and as Pirkei Avos, as is testified in Pirkei Avos, the greatest of the Talmidim was Reb Elazar ben Aruch. To the extent that if all the Chachmei Yisrael, all the Chacham were on one side, Reb Elazar ben Aruch was on another side of the scale, Reb Elazar ben Aruch would outweigh them all. He was great in Nigla. He was also great in Kabbalah. Talks about how the Gemara and Chagiga talks about how he was Deidish and Meister Merkava and how fire came down from heaven. Incredibly great person. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, as we know, he established the yeshiva in Yavna after the Churban Habayis, after the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. And he installed Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he installed Rabban Gamliel to be the Rosh Yeshiva in Yavna. And when he did so, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai himself moved to another city called Berer Chayil. And his 5 Talmidim, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, and the other 4 Talmidim, they went together with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to Berer Chayil. And then Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai passes away. And Rabbi Elazar ben Arach moved to a city. I don't remember the name of the city. It was a hard name to remember. It was a city which was like a resort city. There was, the way it's described, was the waters there were good and the air over there was good. Nice climate. And he was under the impression that his 4 Chavedim would follow him over there. But they didn't. His 4 Chavedim, Rabbi Elazar ben Hurknish, Rabbi Yeshua, and the others, they went to Yavna. So Rabbi Elazar ben Arach also thought maybe he should also go to Yavna, but his wife actually discouraged him, and his wife says, that's not Lefi HaKavod, you're greater than them, they should come to you. So he ended up staying in the city for a while, and then a while later, and what happened was he forgot everything that he learned. There was no Dibuk Chavedim, he wasn't together with his Chavedim, he forgot everything. And a while later, when he went to another city and he was asked to read the Torah, and he opens up to the pasuk HaChodesh Hazel Lachem, and he couldn't read the word straight. And instead of reading HaChodesh Hazel Lachem, he read HaChedesh Hoya Libam. Instead of HaChodesh HaChedesh, instead of Hazeh Hoya, and instead of Lachem, he read Libam. That's the story brought down in the Gemara, brought down in the Medrash. And the obvious moral of the story, the simple moral of the story, is how important it is dibuk chaverim, and not to go off on your own, to be in a place always which is together with chaverim, with whom are dibuk chaverim people, and being able to learn with others. The Rebbe's father, and this is a style which we were familiar with because the Rebbe followed in the style. The Rebbe says, okay, it's a nice story, but what is the idea that HaChodesh Hazel Lachem turns into HaChedesh Hoya Libam? Everything is meduyik. Everything. If that was the mistake that he made, that means that in the words HaChedesh Hazel Lachem being turned into HaChedesh Hoya Libam, in there we have some sort of this. We have a understanding of what the deeper problem over here was. So the Rebbe's father explained each one of these words, and the way that Rabbi Elazar ben Arach changed them is instructive. The first word was HaChodesh, which he changed into HaChedesh. HaChedesh means when a person becomes deaf. What makes a person become deaf? When you've heard something a lot of times, so you become deaf to it. You stop hearing it. You hear it again, again, again. Instead of HaChedesh, instead of becoming deaf to something that we've heard many times, it has to be HaChodesh. Chodesh Melashon Chodesh. It always has to be something which is new to us. The next word, Hazeh, became Hoya. What is Hazeh? Hazeh is something which something you point to, something which is right in front of you. Hoya is something that was. So instead of, again, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach took something which was Hazeh, something which is here today and relevant right now, and it became Hoya, something that was. And the last word is Libam. Lachem into Libam. The last problem is that sometimes something can be stuck in the heart. It's not something which becomes my inyan, which I do, but rather it's something which I keep inside of me. And that's instead of being lachem, which is something becomes your inyan and gansen, and something which you act upon, it becomes libam, it becomes something which remains in the heart. And the Rebbe's father concluded, and he said that the idea of Timchet Mimim, this was again part of the fundraiser, Timchet Mimim, the idea of Timchet Mimim, it has to be HaChodesh, it has to be Chodesh. Our feeling for Timchet Mimim has to be new, it has to be Hazeh, something which is in front of us, and it has to be Lachem. It can't be something which is in the Libam, in the heart, that has to express itself Lepeil through giving money. And this expresses, and obviously also that goes back to the pshat, that because he went off, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach went off to the place where he went, instead of staying fresh and new in a way of HaChodesh Hazel Lachem, he became HaChedesh Hoya Libam. And this is really the challenge that we face today, is that how do we stay HaChedesh Hazel Lachem? How do we stay away from HaChedesh Hoya Libam? When 31 years ago we heard this from the Rebbe, how do we make sure that it becomes something which is relevant. In other words, at the end of the day, we're talking about the Farbrengen about being mashpia on others. To be mashpia on others requires, it has to be chay lahachis. In order to give chayis, in order to give energy to someone else, Sadar Zain Alain, we have to be alive within Yanam ourselves. We have to live with Mashiach. There has to be something to the extent that when you live with something, when you live with Mashiach, then automatically, whoever you're interacting with, you're talking about it. But the question is really, where does this life come from? How do we stay alive and make sure that Mashiach remains something which is on the forefront of our consciousness in a way of chayis, in a way of life? You know, the Sikha which introduced, which played right before I started speaking, the Rebbe talks over there about the tremendous energy that every single one of us has. The Rebbe brings a muscle from atomic energy, that even in the tiniest little particle, you have atomic energy. So a tiny little particle, you figure it's an atom, it's tiny. How does it have energy to be able to, how can it be mashpia on others and have an impact? But we know the impact that atomic energy has. But the vart is energy, the vart is chayis. There has to be the chayis. If you have chayis, you can be very small, but you can have a tremendous impact. But where does the chayis come from? How do we stay fresh? So this, on Friday, on Chav Ches Nissen, as I was learning the Hayom Yom of the day, and we know the Rebbe says the Rebbe alles bavarant. Every question that we have, the answer is always the Rebbe gives it, and very often there are many answers in many different places. But the truth is, this the Hayom Yom of Chav Ches Nissen always fascinated me, because it seems to have. It's hard to find the connection between the Hayom Yom of Chav Ches Nissen and the content of the Sikha. What is the Hayom Yom of Chav Ches Nissen? The Chassidim asked the Alter Rebbe, which avodah is greater, the avodah of Avos Hashem or the avodah of Avos Yisrael? And the Alter Rebbe answered that Avos Hashem and Avos Yisrael, both of them are etched in the neshama and the nefesh and the ruach of every single yid. However, the pasuk says, "Ahafti eschem amar Hashem." The pasuk says that Hashem loves us. Hashem turns to the Klal Yisrael and says, "I love you." Harei de gedola Avos Yisrael. So Avos Yisrael is greater. The Eiv Masha'o of Eiv, because when you have Avos Yisrael, you're loving that which the beloved loves. Hashem loves Yidden. So when you love Yidden, it's not only you're loving Hashem, you're also loving that which Hashem loves, those who Hashem loves. So the Pashtus, it would seem that what the Rebbe is saying over here is that if you have on a scale love on a scale of 1 to 10, okay, so if you only love the Eibishter, so then your love is only a 7 or 8. But if you pick up your love, I have more love, then not only you're going to love the Eibishter, but you're also going to love Eiv Masha'ov Eiv, then you'll have Avos Yisrael also. So if you have Avos Yisrael, it's a sign you have a greater Avos Hashem. But Eibazei Kumtais, if so, then we're talking here quantitative. Pashan Kamos. How much do I love Hashem? Do I love him enough only to love him, or do I love him more in order to love also those who Hashem loves, which is the Yidden? But l'chayda, there's something deeper going on over here. When you love someone, let's speak practice. Because you love someone, it means you love their friends also. Lav dafka. I like someone, I love someone. And why do I like them? Because I enjoy the relationship with them. I enjoy what I receive from the relationship. I enjoy what I get from the relationship. That doesn't necessarily extend to liking whom they like. Loving the people who that person loves doesn't benefit me. But then there's a different type of ava. And that's an ava which is an ava of devekus. Not that I remain something separate from the person who I love. And there's me, there's that person. I love them because of the benefit that they bring me. But then there's an ava which is devekus, which means that I am completely connected and unified and one with that other person. If I'm one with that other person, then automatically I love who that person loves also, because we're one. It's be'echos, it's qualitatively a different level of love. It's a level of love which comes from the vekus. When you love Hashem on that level, then automatically you love all Yidden. Now that's about Avos Yisrael. But l'chayda, that's mamish also the lesson of Chav Ches Nissen. And what was the Rebbe telling us in the Sikha of Chav Ches Nissen? The Rebbe was telling us, you love me. I'm your Rebbe, you love me. And which chassid doesn't love the Rebbe? What the Rebbe does for chassidim. And therefore you're doing what I'm telling you to do. I'm telling you to scream Ad Masai, you're screaming Ad Masai. But where's the dveikus? Where's the Eyev Masha'ov Eyev? I want Mashiach. That's my entire Metzias, the Rebbe says. From day one, from Basi Lagani, Tavshin Yudalef, and even before then, the famous letter the Rebbe writes from the day he went to Cheder, which is a not normal letter the Rebbe writes, right? He's saying, Cheder begins when a child was 3, 4, and the Rebbe is saying from the day he went to Cheder, and even before then, we're talking about when the Rebbe is 2, 3 years old. The Rebbe is already thinking about Mashiach. That's my entire life. Where's the Eyev Masha'ov Eyev? If there's devekus with the Rebbe, if a chassid has devekus with the Rebbe, then every single day that comes along is a Yom Zakai for Mashiach. Just like by the Rebbe, every day is a Yom Zakai. Chav Ches Nissen, the Rebbe screaming, today is the most amazing day about Mashiach. When there's devekus with the Rebbe, we're in the same place. Then there isn't Achedesh or Yalimam. We live in a place of Achedesh Hazalachem. We live in a place where every single day, that's our fire, and we need to stay fresh in that way. We need to refresh our devekus with the Rebbe. And if I could suggest, we all know about the importance of learning Torah, the Torah of the Rebbe. We're talking about dvekus. You want dvekus with the Rebbe. We know that the Rebbe says in Tanya and Perikei, the greatest dvekus, the greatest yichud there is with the Eibishter is to learning Torah. The same thing is also obviously in terms of our iskashrus to the Rebbe, tzadikim deiman lebeiram. The iskashrus is to limit HaTorah. So it's important to learn sichas, and learn mamarim, learn the igros, etc. But at the end of the day, the sichas, the mamarim, the igros, there's a certain emotional texture that has been removed from them in the publication. There is no substitute for actually listening to the Rebbe, listening to the Rebbe sichas, watching the Rebbe sichas, and in terms of what we're talking about here today, listening to the Rebbe sichas about Mashiach, watching the Rebbe sichas about Mashiach, seeing the Rebbe's raw passion. And it has to be taka, not once and not twice, not something which happened 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but on a regular basis. A chassid should have a kvias. Today, Baruch Hashem, with the Manta, it's accessible, available everywhere on apps and on Chabad.org and Vunar Megate and Gem, Vunar Megate. They're to be found. And specifically the sichas of the last years, where it's Moli V'Gadosh in Mashiach. You can't listen to a sikha without being infected with the Rebbe's passion. A day when you listen to a sikha from the Rebbe, from Tafshin Nun, Tafshin Aleph, Tafshin Beis, is a different day. You're not living in the same place. You're living with that excitement. You're living with that passion. You're living with that dvekus. The oyer is incredible. Are you going to understand? If you want to have something with a beginning and with an end, in which every single loose end is wrapped up, you learn the Mugadik Sikha. And in Seichel, it's so leicht. But if you want the oyer, the unfiltered oyer, a chassid has to have a kvias in learning the sichas of the Rebbe. In listening the feiros the sichas, in experiencing that oyer, in staying fresh, in hachedesh zalachem, and then we live in a day where every day comes along. We say today is a Yom Zakat during Mashiach, and when we're that way, the hashpah becomes automatic. Yeah, we need to make also efforts to go out and be mashpia another yidden, but then the hashpah becomes automatic, becomes second nature. Whatever I live with, was ich kochzichin, automatically is something which I am giving over to everyone who I come in contact with, and through that, by being chai and durch dem lahachiyes, will bring about taka the day zenzich den Rebbe dalamata masarat fachin v'hu yigalenu. A good vach and a good chedesh.
Yashikeach, Rabbi Silberberg, for those powerful words. Both the idea that we take the passion, we make it our own, we own Masha'ov Eiv, and the idea of hearing the Rebbe's Teda, it just brings to memory what the Marad Asra of the Shechuna Rav Shvei, tonight is his yard site. And there were two things that were very much consistent with what you were saying now, that we saw by him when someone would ask him, "Was macht ihr Rav Shvei?" His auto response was, "Atog nenter zu Mashiach." The natural given was Mashiach is imminent, and whatever the reality was, is Atog nenter, Hashon nenter. That's the reality. And he was also very, very passionate. He always spoke about it in the 70 about the idea that everyone's told him, when we walk the streets. It's very empowering when we hear the Rebbe's words. Today, he would say that you could walk in the streets on Mol and people would talk. It would look modna. Today, people work with different devices. It's a normal, common phenomenon to hear the Rebbe's words, especially when we're going and coming and we can get distracted with the world out there. The Rebbe lifts us up to the Rebbe's reality. And when then we hear the Rebbe's words, Yemeis HaMashiach Bahem Nimtsoyim Ata, the Rebbe is revealing to us, this is my reality. And the Rebbe is inviting every one of us to live in that reality. Can we imagine what a day would look like when we are living Yemeis HaMashiach Bahem Nimtsoyim Ata? Today is the day Mashiach is coming. If we wake up in the morning, we will wake up earlier. Why? The day I'm going to greet Mashiach, do I want to stay in bed another few minutes? The day I'm going to greet Mashiach, what's my davening going to look like? What's my limud achsidis? It inspires, it empowers, it lifts up every experience of the day and all the pettiness that are so distracting and just create static in our lives. If we just put that on the balance, does that matter if I know that I'm going to imminently greet Mashiach and the Geula Shalema? It all fades away. So these words are very, very powerful. Let us all internalize it and see in each and every our lives to see how we can increase both hearing the Rebbe's Teda, learning the Rebbe's Teda, and living with the Rebbe's reality. We will now hear a sikha from Chav Kislev Tafshin Memhei, in which the Rebbe calls our attention. All it takes is one act, and it has a global impact throughout the entire world.
Zij zeggen dat men neemt in zijn man van Golus und man stellt da rein innewenig, aber in der Nähe von Golui, dem Alufische Lelom, der Mine von Göttlichkeit, ist noch jede Sekunde Geula Hamitis war schlimmer, ist schöner to dämmelt, ist noch in meinem Dumatze von Gela, stellt rein alle dem Szene war wieder Szene, durch sein tagtäglichen Leben stellt rein Göttlichkeit in Mitten von alle seine Piulis, sei Befichu, sei Bilfofcho und sei La Seise, oder dämmel pläst sich und lässt es die alle Unionen, in welche ist Eise, oder Medaber, oder Mechashev, leest tegen deze die af welke is maspia als minenu jiru we geen jasu als ze zullen ze geget als ze vielen aber ze soll leget kommen die geula protis und die Schaße legen sich zusammen kamen geula protis wer sich demol der Dino halocha psuko als hilchin acher horev befragt noch leten Psagdim von Rambam as Leilom, was für ein Mai mit dem Matze, wo es Mann und Mokke mehr soll nicht sein, ist ein Chiu, für jeden, soll sein Atzmi Schokul, v'chol Leilom Kuli Schokul. Bemele kann Machria sein, durch ein und einzige Meister der Dibur oder Machshove Shalei, nicht wie der Jeser will einlernen, aber es ist sehr wichtig, als ein und einzelner Mensch, und sagt, ja, da jenisch benafsche, sei mal mit dem Matze, sie wird sich eishitten mit dem Wort, oder eishitten sich auch viele mit der Meise, Allah es kam wie kam, was ist Tefis Smokim, sei nach Machshove. Passen der Rambam ob als Psag Din, das kann Machria sein, Atzmi v'chol Elam Kuli, und bringen Azole wie Yeshua, und in was besteht das? Die nekudische Bedauer besteht in Druf auf Hereinstellen nach Lufische Leilon, bechol Piulische Leilon.
We now have the privilege to hear from a Rav Rabbani Anash, Shuvi Rabbani Anash, a mashpia and a teacher to many, Harav Reb Levi Garelik.
L'chaim, l'chaim, chaverim, l'chaim. Chassidim, all our dear friends out there, Agut Tavach, Agut Chaydish. First of all, I would like to give a big yashikayach to the Me'argenim, for the organizers for putting together such a program, which definitely did not come easy. We just heard from the Rebbe the power of the individual and how everyone has to see himself that he can tip the balance of the whole world, every individual. While this program is mostly devoted to the concept of tut als wasir kent, and I'm sure that most people will basically talk about, as the Rebbe said then, letaches eitzah, to try to figure out what we should do, I'd like to focus a little bit on a little bit of a different angle, with your permission, and respond to some of the questions that I received over the weekend, over Chav Ches Nissen, and perhaps discuss them here. And I would categorize them basically in two general questions. The first question was, it's already over 30 years that Rebbe spoke the famous Sikha, and Mashiach is still not here. Maybe that's what some people claim. Maybe we messed up. Maybe we made a mistake and we should not be doing what we're doing and we have to figure out something else totally. This is the first question. The second one is basically a sequel to the first, that maybe we're not the right people for this. And perhaps if others would be doing this, maybe they would do a better job. So I would like to address this area, as the Rebbe said, the power of the individual. And since it's Motzei Shabbos, and there's a famous word by Yidden that Motzei Shabbos, there's a minig to say a story of the Baal Shem Tov, that it's a sgula for parnose, etc. So, and of course, the famous three mistakes in this statement. First of all, doesn't have to be of the Baal Shem Tov. It could be of any tzaddik. It's not a sgula for parnose, it's a sgula for alle gute Sachen, etc. And doesn't have to be dafka Motzei Shabbos. So I would like to share a Baal Shemske Maise that happened with my father, Rabbi Gerelik, and it'll fit exactly how the Rebbe spoke over here about the power of the individual. My parents went on shlichus, my father and my mother's Alzan Gesund, Zolange Jorn. They went over 60 years ago to Italy. And they went in the year Tafshin Yutes. It was in the December of 1958. They got to Italy, was in the month of Kislev. They came on the day of Yutes Kislev. Okay, and that went through B'Sholem. All of a sudden, my father realized the first Shabbos Bevorchim, Chanukah time, that is not by the Rebbe. He's missing the first Farbrengen. My father, when you took my father away from the Rebbe, is like you take a fish out of the water. When a fish, you take him out of the water, jumps from alle Seiten. My father, he took him away from 770 and he started going crazy. Was he missed the Farbrengen of Shabbos Bevorchim. Came Yud Shvat, he went berserk. He missed another Farbrengen of the Rebbe. He told my mother then, in 1959, those days, it was saying, like saying today, that 3 times a day we're going to go to the moon. That's how it sounded then. Who went from overseas to the Rebbe? People went once a year, once in 3 years. Came Purim, and my father couldn't take it anymore. My father decided he must go to the Rebbe, but he doesn't have a penny to his name. So he decided he's going to go for the last days of Pesach. How's he going to go for the last days of Pesach? He doesn't have a penny. The family that actually approached the Rebbe to send shluchim to Italy was the famous Zippel family. There were 4 brothers. The oldest was Mr. Carlo Zippel. He's the one that approached the Rebbe. So my father actually approached the youngest of the brothers, Eddie, and Tamazema Shuge gemacht, that he should buy him a ticket to go to the Rebbe. He talked about it in 59 to buy a ticket to America. And you know what? Mr. Zippel, he fell for it, Eddie, and he bought my father a ticket. So my father is standing a few days before Pesach. He's in 7th heaven. He has a ticket in his hand to go to the Rebbe for the last days of Pesach. The father wrote a letter to the Rebbe. The Bezos Hashem is coming for the last days. And the first days to him, it was heaven. He's going to the Rebbe next week. The day that he was going to leave, I think it was the third day of Chol Hamoed, my father was standing downstairs. We lived in an apartment building, waiting for the taxi. And he's with his ticket. He's going to the Rebbe. He's the happiest man on earth. As he's waiting for the taxi's coming in 2 minutes. All of a sudden, the mailman shows up. My father saw the mailman go into the building and putting envelopes into the people's boxes. And he saw that he also put an envelope in his box. So my father went over to the box. It's a letter from the Rebbe. And I'm going to share with you this letter right there on the screen. It's a letter that the Rebbe wrote, Yud Beis Nisan Tafshin Yates, where the Rebbe writes as follows, Shalom Uvracha. I hope you can see it on the screen. Yeah, if you see it. Shalom Uvracha. In response to your letter of Yud Nisan, in which you write, I have over here the original with me, in which you write the Kosal Kadaitach to go away from Milan for the last days of Pesach. Says the Rebbe, moving appel shebedover. The shock about this, that because this is the first Pesach that you're in Italy, Zman Cherusenu, this is a time of going out from all the Mitzarim, and it's a opportune time to do things with the Kehillah, v'chulu. And the Rebbe goes through over here the importance of the last days of Pesach, and this is the time of the Achar Shel Pesach is the idea of the Geula Achreina, Bias HaMoshiach, v'chulu, as we explained the Sichos. And therefore the Rebbe ends off in the last paragraph, v'hirotzen, the mitach simcha v'tuv levav, on the hatzlacha agdeila shenitna lei, u'lezugas ha'rabanis tichye, that the great hatzlacha that you were given to be mefitz the mayones in your kehila, u'memeno yofutzu b'sviveseha, Yenatzel kol yom for yom, you'll take advantage of every single day, and especially the last days of Pesach, because the whole idea of the last days is of Ufaratzto, the Moshiach, and especially in Sutza B'David Malcolm Mashiach. My father, on the one hand, he became, his whole dream went five. On the other hand, for our family at least, what we learned from the story is, this is mamish abal shemske maise 100%. The Rebbe should send a letter. This was all went by mail. And the Rebbe foresaw that a minute before my father goes into the taxi, he's going to get this letter. What we learned from this, that there's someone in control. Not only Beruchnis, Pashat Begashmis. And the Rebbe takes care of every single individual. Therefore, all those that are in despair regarding the current situation, please remember, this is just the Akdama, the introduction. Yesh balabayis lebiros. Everything is under control, and we have nothing to be in despair. We're not voden. We have to continue. There's no question about it. We have to continue doing. Aber chas v'shalom, to think that there's something which is out of control over here. That's number one. So if that's the case, as after this, a little Akdama, I would like to address the first question that I mentioned before, and that is what people are saying, some people are saying, that maybe we messed up, maybe we made a mistake, we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. So the Rebbe Baruch Hashem bewarnt out. So I would like to quote from another letter that my father received, and that was the first year that he went on Shlichus. Just to give a little background to the story. Those days, there were very few shluchim, very, very few. And my father had almost nobody to share with things, to discuss things, etc. So anytime a guest showed up was a very big thing. One of the guests who showed up at that time, his name was Rabbi J.J. Hecht. Rabbi J.J. Hecht made a trip from America to Israel. Those days, you couldn't go direct from America to Israel. You had to stop in Europe. So he stopped off in Italy. So my father, Baruch Hashem, had someone who he could share things, discuss things, etc. Another person who my father was very close to at that time, and he also came to Italy. And he actually came to Italy before my parents to discuss things with the Balabatim, and that was Rabbi Binyamin Gorodetsky. So seemingly, after they came to Italy, they went back to the Rebbe and they gave regards from Rabbi Garelik. But it looks like that in the regards, they also mentioned that Rabbi Garelik is very zubrach. Why is he zubrach? Because he did something. Unfortunately, I don't know what that something is, but my father felt that he did something wrong. It wasn't the correct thing to do, and perhaps maybe he's not doing his shlichus correctly, etc. So my father did not write to the Rebbe, but all of a sudden, on Zayin Adar Sheni, my father gets another letter from the Rebbe, where the Rebbe addresses this issue, and you can see it right there on your screen, and hopefully this will answer the question. If you give a look, the Rebbe starts off, Shalom Uvracha, Me'asher hinni kabbalas nichtavam, I received your letter, and in addition to the Pash means Prisha Shalom, the regards from Rabbi Binyamin, Rabog is Rabbi Binyamin Elio Gorodetsky, and Rabbi Yankiv Yehuda Hecht, and etc., etc. Now comes the Rebbe in the next paragraph. I am sure that this is superfluous that I even have to mention this. That we should not despair. If in the past there was maybe a mistake in something, in any issue. As, for example, what I was told by Rabbi Hecht and Rabbi Bergardetsky. Says the Rebbe, and please take these words. It is a normal thing when people do things. As the Chachamim say, the literal translation is that a person does not really get clarity in a halacha unless etc. What's the etc.? The etc. is that Rebbe doesn't want to write it, but the etc. is Elohim Kain Nichshalba. If he stumbles over it, if he makes a mistake, like you say in English, from mistakes you learn. So in halach it's also like that, says the Rebbe. And it's normal. A person learns much more from his mistakes. To know what to do in the future. And the Rebbe adds, you have the schus of Rabbim, you have the schus of the Rabbeim, and the schus of the Rabbeim is helping you in such a way that the Rebbe is with you wherever you go. And therefore, if somebody even thinks for a moment that he made a mistake and maybe he messed up, the Rebbe disagrees with you. The Rebbe wants to take what you call a mistake, that you call it an opportunity to be able to perfection what we're doing. No one messed up anything. We're doing a very good job. But then we have to continue going with much more chayas and kayach until the job is not finished. But chas v'sholem, that because we look at the past, it should cause a setback. And the Rebbe makes it very clear that the Rabbeim are going along with us. We have nothing to worry about. So, Chevra, let's continue. That's as far as the first question is concerned. The second one, which is a little deeper, and the second question, as I mentioned, was that some people think that maybe I'm the wrong person. I'm not zeiche. I don't have the schus. And if others would do it, they would do a better job, etc. So for this, there's also another third. My main point of view is to show that the Rebbe and Alt Bavort, any question that anybody may have, we don't have to think up of new eitzes or new things. The Rebbe told us very clear in all of these issues. And Baruch Hashem, I have the great schus that my parents got so many letters from the Rebbe in the first years because they had nobody who to share with. And it's a known thing that if the Rebbe said something to somebody, It's not only for that individual. Sometimes it's something dafke for that individual. But b'derech klal, most of these things are heroic klolis for everybody. Everybody could learn from this. So there's a very famous story. My mother even has it on, I believe she said it once on the gem, but over here you're going to see the original of it. There was one time that my mother was called to speak in a certain city not far from Milan. There was a Chassidish Olam over there. And my mother went and she spoke. It was Batzlacha Rabbah. When she finished speaking, there was still some time left. So the people asked my mother to say more stuff, no chepes. And my mother's mind went blank. Blank. She couldn't remember a thing. She speaks every Shabbos and she spoke to the girls and she used to speak to the ladies. Blank. Garnished. No, so she started singing with them, something, whatever. On her way back to Milan, she was very tzibroch. And she wrote a letter to the Rebbe, and she told the Rebbe that she feels that if the Rebbe would have sent somebody else, they would have done a better job. They would stood there, and they would have already what to say. And she was standing there as a V. So the Rebbe answered her, and here's the letter. Gerade last week, Bashgacha Pratis, many people asked me for a copy of this letter, and here's the letter right there. Okay, this was also written in Adar Beis, and the Rebbe writes as follows: blessings and greetings to my mother. Now, this was already in English, so it's more for the Olam. This is to acknowledge receipt of your letter of the 21st of Adar, and also your previous correspondence. May Hashem grant that all the matters about which you write, including your activities in progress, as well as those to be undertaken in the future, should all be crowned with hatzlacha and in a greater measure than expected or anticipated at first glance. That's the Akdama. Then the Rebbe writes, in the literature of Chassidus, such activities are classified and explained under two categories: seeding and planting. There is what's called zriya, and then there is netiya, right? The difference is, in the case of seeding, as for example, sowing wheat, the fruits take less time to appear than in the case of planting a tree. The reason is because and the Rebbe explains the basic difference between planting and seeding, about the Hetitzos, which is going to happen, which you could read on your own. The main thing which I want to read is the third paragraph that starts with the words "in the light of above." I know that Rebbe wrote this to my mother, but I'm going to show how this is shaykh to every single one of us. The Rebbe writes as follows: in the light of the above, and also in answer to your previous letter, it is surprising to me that you should have any doubt about your ability or the success of your efforts, etc. It would appear as if you have doubts as to whether the one who gave you the assignment had made a wise choice. Now watch how the Rebbe says this. Surely you do not entertain such a thought that the one who sent you may have not made a wise choice. And then the Rebbe continues, though in any case, I would not consider it in any personal way as far as I'm concerned. In other words, the Rebbe doesn't take personal if someone would think that way. However, now comes the good part. However, if you're certain that the one who gave you the assignment has not made a mistake, then you should continue your work with certainty and confidence, and with Hashem's help, you will succeed. And the Rebbe finishes off, I trust that you and all yours have absorbed Purim in its true and joyous spirit. May Hashem grant that the spirit of Purim will be carried over in all your activities throughout the year. So I am sure that no one needs more explanation than this, where the Rebbe makes it very, very clear that if someone else is the one that gives the assignment, no. If the Rebbe is the one that gave us the assignment and he gave it to us, then he's in total control, and we just have to continue doing what we're doing. Yes, we have to we have to figure out always possible, but we always have to look going up, every single individual. First of all, L'chaim, l'chaim. We were told by our Rabbein that the neshamas that were part of Tomchet Mimim were hand-picked by the Rabbein. It's not stamazeh, it's not a jungle out there. Every single one who ends up in Tomchet Mimim, their neshamas were hand-picked by the Rabbein, that they should be part of the system. There is no question that all the people who behashgacha pratis come in contact with the Rebbe are handpicked by the Rebbe. We see some people came in contact with the Rebbe, the Gashmias, at least what we see, and others didn't. Those that did come in contact, there is no question that their neshama were handpicked. Therefore, no one should entertain for a moment that maybe he's not worthy of the job, maybe someone else would have done something better. We were all entrusted by the Rebbe to do the most beautiful and important shlichus in history since the creation of the world. Think for a moment, there's neshama sitting up there for 5,500 years, waiting to see how we are going to finish this. Therefore, don't despair. Just hold on a little bit longer, because any given moment, we will be zeicher to go out of this galus. And the Rebbe will be proud of every single one of us. At the same time, every one of Klal Yisrael has an achrayus to bring Mashiach and do everything within his power to get the job done. Everyone has it. The tools are there. Grab them and get to work. There are dozens of programs, which I'm sure throughout the program you will see things that every single individual could do, and no one is exempted. We're all part of this. And when we are all together going to do everything that we can, one way or the other, it makes no difference if we're a chassid, if we're a shliach, if we're a businessman, makes no difference. We're a yid. We are part of the neshama klalis. We're part of all of this all together. Everyone together. Let's get to work. And then we will finally be able to witness the Nis'ave HaKadosh Baruch Hu Liyas L'Tira B'Tachtenim in its full glory. So, l'chaim, l'chaim to everyone. Let's remember, Yesh Balabais L'Birazu. He gave us a job. He trusts us with this job. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given it to us. And Be'ezus Hashem, we are going to finish it tonight. And in Mirz Hashem, tomorrow morning, we'll be able to bring the Karban Tamid in the Beis HaMikdash, exactly how the Rambam says in Hilchos Mashiach, that we're going to have Shleimus HaTeira of a mitzvahs, and we'll be able to do all the 630 mitzvahs. And then we'll be able to see how Nis'ave HaKadosh Baruch Hu Liyas L'Dira B'Tachtenim in its full glory. L'chaim, l'chaim, Hagut Tavach, Hagut Chodesh, and of course, Mashiach now.
Chaim, Chaim, Agreisni Ashikeach, Rabbi Gerelik, for those powerful, powerful words. The letters speak for themselves, and seeing how invested the Rebbe is to each and every shliach, each and every individual. I believe there was another member of the family, I believe one of the aunts of Rabbi Gerelik, who came as a girl to assist his parents in Shlichus in Milan, also was worried if they matter or if their work is recognized. And the Rebbe wrote a beautiful letter, I believe it's printed in the Gem, in the second volume of the Gem book, in which the Rebbe says, most definitely, your work matters to the Eibishter, and the Rebbe adds on B'Segrayim, and surely it means a lot to me, the efforts that they're doing. It brings to memory a story I once heard from the Baal HaMaisa. Reb Notke Barkan Olav Hashalom shared a story that he went by the Rebbe for dollars. He was on his way back to Eretz Yisrael, Nachlas Har Chabad, and he's standing in line. And as he passes by the Rebbe asks him, "Ihr fahrt in Brazil?" And Reb Notke, a durchgewegter Chassidische Yid, without hesitating for a second, said, "Yeah." The Rebbe asked him if he's going to Brazil, and he says, "Yeah, I'm going to Brazil." And the Rebbe gives him $1 to give it to take to Brazil. He walks out of dollars, he calls a travel agent, he says, a change of plans. I was going to go to Eretz Yisrael, I'm actually going to Brazil. And he gets a ticket, he goes to Brazil, he has no clue what, when, or where. The Rebbe gefragt, oi befort in Brazil. And the Rebbe's a shaila shena maskana. He comes to Brazil. It's a lengthy story, how he ended up meeting somebody who he knew back from Eretz Yisrael many years ago, also from Riga originally. And there was somebody in the family that Rahmal Islam was going to go and marry out. And he spent the night with his bacher, and he thought it wasn't effective. And a short while later, the bacher let go of it and actually made a shidduch with a wonderful Yiddish girl. And he called Rabbi Barkan to come to him in Sadi Kedushin. And Rav Notke was Farbrengen about this experience. But if we stop for a moment and reflect, here's a chassid, he's going by the Rebbe. And he has his destiny, he has his agenda where he's going to. But that was a secondary agenda. His essence, his whole mahus was, I'm a soldier. And the Rebbe asked me, going to Brazil, which means regardless of what we may be engaging in our day-to-day activities, our core quintessential essence is focused on Geula. It's focused on where the Rebbe wants us to be. It's focused on our individual shlichus. And in the flash of a moment, we say, yeah, I'm ready for Geula. That's my reality. That's my destiny. The activities tonight on the website onemitzvah.org /sign up is doing wonders. There's constantly new sign-ups, and it's very inspiring to see the additions. Just a few names that just recently, Shmuley Litvish, Shmuley Kreitzes, David Lubavitch, Yudin Chamad. There's constantly a flow of new sign-ups. So please, everyone, take the moment and inspire others to do the same. onemitzvah.org /sign up, so that we can turn this into a real global impact, flooding the world with all of us who are taking charge and telling the Rebbe aloud, Hineni, we are signing up to your call, to the Rebbe's call to action, and we trust that every word the Rebbe is telling us that we can means that we really can, and if we can, we must engage and involve ourselves in every moment, machshava dibru maisa, in implementing and bringing about the Geula. We now have the ability, we're going to see now a sikh of the Rebbe, Yud Tes Kislev Taf Shin Mem Aleph, where the Rebbe tells us, seize the moment. Now is the time to conquer the world.
Vadose der Limud, lechejera ma setzt rein in Tfise, weil der sehr setzt rein die Jiden, in Tfise von Golus kem duber leil Baruch, is das we Jesev huret Mitzrayim, kipshuta. Wenn Zahle Menschen nennt man a Nefesh, a Chelik, a Shenis B'Yisrael, a Chelik Elokam Imal Mamosh, Meyigra Roma, le Bira Mikto, in Dvadose Bira Mikto, viele Bisman Shabes Amigdash Oyakaya. Steht auf der Rufechet, auf das Meyigra Roma von Kise HaKovid, und noch ein Neshomer, Shenasata B'Teherohi, wo das noch Hecher von Nato Brosse von dem Mord von Kise HaKovid, und so kommt Europa in Nibira Amikto, Nele Mazar Tachten, Shin Tachten Lemate Imen, wo das der Rest der Golus, wie sagt, in der Geres Akedira, noch kommt zu der Golus, in dem Golus Gufe, Zman HaGolus. Und in der Ruf Gufe, der Cheshech Koppel Chupol, von nicht wisse die Mashiach, mit alle Simonim, wer rechen seis in Sien von Messiach des Eit. Ist das Jesef huret mit zweimal Yerida Achig Dele Avshoris. Da sagt dann gleich Teres Semes, wo das Eche Teres Chaim Hero Bachayim, aber soll wissen sein, aber Jesef huret mit zweimal, in der Fall, was durch hat der Yeride, wird gleich Kopfschot. Bis wann das wird der Loschen und der Inyan, was mir Yom ad Yom, und mir Nora darf sie hören. Mit Zerayim Paris, demol gewähren am Melech Bikipo, weil das ist der Pashtus der Kesher. Was hat Ashachis mi Yom ad Yom, bis Ador Retzach wegen mit Zerayim allein. ist aber gewähnt der jeden Yom ad Yom, und bischaß mot kevish gewähnt Pare, mit zwei Moten kevish gewähnt, wie jeden Yom ad Yom.
We now have the great privilege to hear from the Rebbe's Shliach in Salt Lake City, Utah, Harav Benny Zippel.
A gute Woche. A gute Woche, everybody. A Chaim v'livracha. Was the Chassidische Farbrengen can ufton, kamalach nichol nicht ufton. Should be zeiche to see the Geula Amitas Vashlema right in the middle of this Farbrengen any second right now. A Chaim v'livracha. I'm not from the big speakers, and I was wondering myself how I got myself into this. Not sure that I fit into this group of very inspiring individuals. But I just want to share something. The Rebbe says, I was looking over the Sikha over and over throughout Shabbos last night and today, the Sikha of Chav Zayin Nisan, Chav Ches Nisan of Thursday night, which I was privileged to be there myself. It was just a very short time before I myself went on Shlichus. When the Rebbe says about Ichlazus Ibra zu Eich, I remember standing there when the Rebbe was saying these words, and of course the question that is asked, the Rebbe says that Alt was abgetan v'chulu 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 didn't work, so the Rebbe is turning it over to us. What does it mean that the Rebbe is turning it over to us? If the Rebbe Kvayochel did not do it, so we are going to contemplate that we are going to do it. So one thing that I'd like to share that to me was a tremendous inspiration, myself personally, in my shlichus and the way it relates to Moshiach and the way it relates to shlichus in general, but the Oidvel Hoiker, about like the Rebbe said, the shlichus Hoikri, the Ochin Esatzmei, the Skol Olam Kula, the Kabbalah's Play Moshiach Tzidkenu. The Gemara says about Harbe Lamati Mirabaysa, I learned a lot from my teachers. I've learned more from my friends. But Umitalmidai Yoiser Mikulam. And I've had the privilege to share this story before. And to me, it's a very, very impactful story that I'd like to share with everybody tonight, that I think really relates to what this Farbrengen is all about. Many, many years ago, this goes back, I've been on Shlichus now for 30 years. I was able to receive a bracha from the Rebbe by dollars on Chav Vav Adar Rishon Tovshin Nun Beis, the day before Chav Zayin Adar, Sunday night. Chav Vav Adar Rishon, we were looking into exploring the possibility of going on Shlichus to Utah. We had written into the Rebbe, we didn't get an answer. And I decided to go by dollars the last moment, Chav Vav, Sunday night. And the Rebbe was told that this was Zippel, who was asking the Rebbe for Askama Bracha to travel to Utah to see if Enu Chabadas could be open. And we're zeicha to receive a Hatzlacha Rabu Muflaga Sunday night, Chav Vav, Adar Rishon, Tovshin Nun Beis, March the 1st of 1992. Many, many years ago, I met a young man who came to my group at the University of Utah. A Jewish student, a Jewish female student, brought this young man, and he came to my group and introduced himself. I asked if he was Jewish, and he says, no, he was not Jewish, but his mother was. Just gives you an idea a little bit of his background, where he came from. He started coming around regularly. Baruch Hashem, today is a Chassidish younger man, he's a Lubavitch younger man. But I want to share a story with you that I think really drills the point home that he shared with me and the impact that it made on me, that it really, really left a very strong impact on me. This young man was a young kid in his early 20s from South America. He was here at the University of Utah studying business. And Utah happens to be the Western hub for Delta Airlines. While Atlanta is the Eastern hub for Delta, Salt Lake City is the Western hub for Delta Airlines. This goes back probably in the late 90s, early 2000. And back those days before 9/11 and so on and so forth, it was very common for young people to go work at the airline because the job came with a perk that's called travel privileges. Airline representatives get to fly free as long as there are seats available without a reservation. Nowadays, flights are much more full. It's a whole different story. But for a young college student who's not frum, it came in very handy. He has flight privileges. And when he's in the mood, he travels. He travels ahin, aher, across country, across the world. Why not? So we started coming around to Chabad house regularly. And then once in a while, he would come to the Chabad house and be like, Rabbi, I've worked too hard. He was working for Delta as a luggage handler. He was one of these guys that throws the bag up on the airplane, not getting tremendous amount of money, but the biggest perk was getting the flight privileges. And he would come to Chabad and be like, Rabbi, I need a break. I've worked too hard lately. I think I'm going to New York for a few days. I think I'm going to Hawaii for a few days. I think I'm going here, I'm going there. And he went around. This is, again, we're talking late 90s, maybe early 2000. And it was a summer day. And he came to Chabad and he says, Rabbi, I need a break. I'm going to Switzerland for the weekend. He's taking a trip to Europe. Why not? It doesn't cost him anything. He checks the loads of the plane from his computer. He knows which flights are flying half empty. And he gets a flight first class, like a pirate, lay down flat, have good food. Why not? And he went to Switzerland for the weekend for 2-3 days, left from here on Thursday, was coming back on Monday. Came back, and he came to see me at Chabad house, rather upset. And this is what he shared with me, and I want to share it with you and really share with you what an impact it made on me, that story. He was coming back from Europe. He was flying from Zurich to JFK, which is about an 8-hour flight, and then JFK to Salt Lake, which is another roughly 5-hour flight. Pretty long flights. He showed up on a hot, muggy summer day at the Zurich airport, and he wanted to be comfortable. How does a young college student fly comfortable in the summer? He came wearing shorts, wearing a tank top, a sleeveless shirt, no socks on his feet, and flip-flops. He shows up to the gate in Zurich and he flashes his Delta employee card, asking for a boarding pass. And the gate agent hands him over a boarding pass, and she puts him, where does she seat him? She gives him a seat, the very, very last row of the airplane, right at the end of the airplane, right where the bathrooms are and the kitchen is, where all the grumpy people get together when they are tired from their flight. So he looks at the boarding pass and he tells the gate agent, he says, wait a second, why did you put me in the back of the flight? I know the load of this plane, and I know that there are plenty open seats in first class. Why don't you give me a first class seat? I'm entitled to it as a Delta employee. So the gate agent takes one look at him in his face, and she says to him, it's because of how you're dressed. Again, how was he dressed? He was dressed in shorts, tank top, no socks, and flip-flops. He wanted to be comfortable in the summer. And he engages back to the gate agent, to the Delta agent, and he says to her, because of how I am dressed, he says, look around the gate area and look around the passengers around the gate area. Look at how they're dressed. They're wearing even less than I do. So what's up with me? Why me? And here's the word that she tells him that I'll never forget, that reverberate in my mind every day. The gate agent says to him, these are paying passengers. Paying passengers, we have no control over how they show up for a flight. She said to him, you are a company representative. You represent Delta Airlines. And Delta representatives, company representatives are held to a higher standard. So he says back to her, He says, are you saying that if I take a taxi and I go quickly into town and I buy myself a pair of proper slacks, dress pants, and a button-down shirt, and a pair of socks, and a pair of shoes, I get to fly first class all the way from Zurich to JFK and from JFK to Salt Lake? She says, absolutely, but not the way you're dressed. The way you're dressed is not fit for a company representative. And he told me that when he came. He said he looked quickly at his watch, and it was not bichdei sheyaser to be able to take a taxi, go into town when the plane will start boarding any minute. And he said he set himself on the airplane in the last row of the plane, flying from Zurich to JFK, 8 hours, verkvetched, sitting there, all uncomfortable, under the banner Kvayochel of flying comfortable. And the same from JFK to Salt Lake. Why? Because company representatives are held to higher standards. Friends, brothers, sisters, shluchim, anash, anybody that calls him or herself a Lubavitcher, a chassid, a mekusher of the Rebbe. I think this day of Chav Ches Nisan, Chav Zayin Chav Ches Nisan, as the Rebbe writes in the Sicha about a specialty of Chav Zayin Nisan, which is Shemen Zay Zoch, Chav Zayin, and Chav Ches is Koyach. And then the Rebbe mentions that it goes into Chav Tes, which is Erev Rosh Chodesh, and then Rosh Chodesh Iyar. This day, 31 years ago, of Chav Ches Nisan, has to achieve a change, as the Rebbe says numerous times about Mashiach, that the first thing we have to change as far as Mashiach comes is our mindset. We cannot be in the mindset of accepting the status quo of the Golus. What does it mean in practical terms? In practical terms, there's people on this call that are a lot wiser than me, and Grace Mashpim, and Grace Chassidim, and big Fashteyers, and I don't measure myself against them, but I can just tell you the way I look at it. I think until Chav Zayin Nisan, Tavshin Nun Aleph, I think many of us could have had the imagination, Kvayochel, of being bystanders, whether it is paying passengers or bystanders. The Rebbe is going to do this, and we are just going to hop along for the ride. And when the Rebbe is telling us Chav Zayin Nisan and that Sichem, when the Rebbe said Ichlosh das Ibra zu Eich, when the Rebbe is telling each and every one of us, you are a company representative. You're not a visitor. You're not part of the audience. You're not even a paying passenger. You are a company representative. You are mekusher to me, to the Rebbe, who together with us undertook the plan to bring Mashiach to the Derech Shvi, as the Rebbe told us on Yud Shvat, Tavshin Yud Aleph, and the Rebbe was reminding each and every one of us that our mindset has to change. We have to regard ourselves with anivus and humility and modesty, and we are all nothings, whatever you want. But at the end of the day, we are company representatives, and company representatives are held to higher standards. And whether everybody called Chada from Shira Delay, and everybody can check with their mashpia and with their Rav and with their mentor, with their whatever you want, whether it is matters pertaining to Chitas, to Rambam, to davening, to tzedakah, to Chassidishkeit, to learning Chassidus, whatever it is, company representatives are held to higher standards. We are the Rebbe's company representatives. And the Rebbe gave us the privilege in that Sicha. When the Rebbe says, I turn it over to you. Don't expect to come on to this plan to bring Mashiach to this world in a passive fashion, that I'm going to get it done, and you're just going to come along for the ride. You are going to have to sit in the driver's seat together with me. We are the Rebbe's company representatives, and we have to change the mindset within each and every one of us. And by doing that, we will take a bizaycha to the izgalos, malkeinu bereshenu, take it from miyad. L'chaim v'livracha.
L'chaim, l'chaim. Yashikeach Gadol Rabbi Zippel. That was a very, very powerful message. That line will definitely go real far, recognizing our true identity as representatives of the Rebbe. Reminds me of a story. Reb Chaim Gutnick, Olva Shalom from Melbourne, Australia, had a very unique relationship, a unique kesher with the Rebbe, and was comfortable to speak and ask various questions that wasn't so common for Chassidim to ask. He was once in Yechidus, and he asked the Rebbe whether he should change his hat. He wore a Rabbanische hat, a Hamburg hat, and some of his chaverim were somewhat getting on his case. He should wear a kneit, a Lubavitch identity. He should look like a company representative. And he asked the Rebbe whether he should change his hat or not. And this is what the Rebbe answered him. If you would show me any one of the chassidim of all the Rabbeim, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, all the Rabbeim, I would be able to identify on each chassid of which of the Rabbeim he was a chassid of, and not by looking at his hat. Throughout the generations, there were different hats of the chassidim, what they wore, and the Rebbe said, I will be able to identify a chassid. That's a chassid from the Mittler Rebbe. This is a chassid from the Rebbe Marash, but not by looking at their hats, but rather in was kocht er sich. What's his passion? What's his koch? And by seeing his koch, this looks like a chassid of the Mittler Rebbe. The Rebbe said, Ma'ayin HaChassid, I don't know exactly the Lashon, but this was the context, the Teichen, Ma'ayin HaChassid, kocht sich in drei inyanim. One is, Gavos Shel Yisrael, was a time of Yehudi and Jewish identity, Jewish pride, Gavos Shel Yisrael. The zweite Sache, kocht sich in Mivtzoyim. Und the dritte Sache, the Rebbe said, kocht sich in Mashiach. So Rabbi Gutnick took the opportunity and asked the Rebbe, what's his koch sich Mashiach? Mivtzoyim, we know what it looks like. Mivtzoyim, you do Mivtzoyim, you go out, you put tefillin on a yid, neshek, whatever it may be. That's koch sich Mivtzoyim. What does it mean, koch sich Mashiach? What does it look like? And the Rebbe answered him that in every machshava, dibur, u'maisa is guided and inspired by lahavi limeis HaMashiach, which means weighing a thought, weighing a dibur, a machshava. We have to we have to ask ourselves, how will this hasten? How will this bring Mashiach closer? And this is what the Rebbe is telling us. What it looks like a company representative. A company representative. The Rebbe is telling us clearly that it means that we are infused in holding our position that the Rebbe handed us and hands to each and every one of us. That we have to see Lahavim the Mashiach is our goal, our focus, our vision, our passion, and it guides and inspires every thought, word, and action. Can we imagine how our lives will be transformed instantaneously if that is our guide, if that's the formula, that is the channel of how we will conclude and make the choices in life. And it's important to recognize that, because when the Rebbe says Machshava Dibur Ma'aseh, means literally, our thoughts cannot be gullus thoughts. And in recognizing that, we have to allow ourselves to be flooded with thoughts that are only the Rebbe's thoughts, only what Torah, Yiddishkeit, Chassidus, and the Rebbe has. Let us take the moment and say, do I want to hear this piece of news? How many times would the Rebbe laugh at people who need to hear the news many times in the day? And today it's inevitable. We can be distracted so many times. Do we want to, or do we want to make a firm resolve? And hearing the Rebbe's voice echo today as it was the day the Rebbe said it. Tut alles was he kennt. Do I have time for this nonsense? Will it make a difference? Will engaging in this activity, this piece of news or whatever it may be, will this hasten the Rebbe's galus? Will this be lovely Mashiach? It's so simple. The Rebbe gives us the formula. So tonight, amongst all of our achlatis and the inspiration that we're hearing, which is so powerful, we all want to make the Svada should be Pe'ilos. In addition, for the campaign that's going now live, the onemitzvah.org, let's all sign up. Let's see, we can spread the message to as many people as we can, and let's flood the world with having many company representatives, because the Rebbe wants every Yid b'derenu, and see derenu at Mimanigev, and Yeder Yid b'derenu to be his shliach. We will now hear the Sikha of the Rebbe.
Und es hat sich glaube ich zusammen 10 Lieden zusammen und es gucken wie hab der alle Unionen wird noch nicht herausgebracht Maschiach hat dober hat pri eine Muren klar und klar und dann noch ich komme zu gehen und Luft zu machen es doch noch eine Scheibe noch ein nach Farbrengen das noch einmal was schreiben dann noch ich sagen Masmidi in das Halten und Gedenken, was verschrieben geworden, und der bleibt so, und Rachmon Islam ist der Recht, also Hein Banach soll noch nicht kommen, Moschiach, und es recht, also morgen soll noch nicht kommen, Moschiach, und übermorgen sollten nicht kommen, Moschiach. Und es hat Freitag, und der Eisam soll schreien, auf Mose, Hulu, Eme wohl geschrien mit Hanemes, wohl gemeint mit Hanemes, ist eine sichere Sache, als Moscheech wohl schon lange gekommen, zusammen mit der Gula Amitis war schlimmer. Was ich kann noch tun, du weiß ich nicht. Warum alles, was ich getan, bis ist der Hevel, der Lorik, sie gar nicht der Reise von mir geblieben in Golus. Und was noch mehr, wir sind geblieben mit der Gol in den Golus, פנים יחד בנגי צעבידס השם, וכמדובר כמה פעמים, mir das einzige Sache, was ich kann nicht tun, ich gebe das über jeden von euch und tut alles, was ihr kennt und seht, herabbringen, Maschiachen, denke von mir, ja, Mamosch, in der Leben, die Unionentlacke von Eris, die Theo, aber den Kehlen, die Tichun, und wie hier rotzen, als Sobkov, sollen sich gefunden, 10 Nieden, was werden sich einnackschen und sagen, dass sie muss nicht werden. Bei den Nebensten ist das damals das Amt Scheyerefu, wie so lacht zu laven, Neinu, Chatesenu und Chaltonu, ist eine sichere Sache, der Nebensten wird herabbringen, der Gula Amitis war schlimm und Teke von Miyad Mamos und auf eine Meise, was sich kann noch tun in dem, auf zu gern machen, jeden von nachher verschlich auf Zdoke, und wie hier rotzen, aber ich habe getan, alles, was ich kenne, und ich kann nur haben, tut alles, was sie kennt, wie hier rotzen, also unser Gefühl zwischen euch, auf Kolponen, 1, 2, 3, was soll nicht zu geben, was man soll tun, und was man soll tun. Weil man soll echt spielen, und soll sein, denke von mir, Mama, schon mit der Simcha, betuvli wo.
We're now privileged to hear from Dr. Avi Rosenberg, a male and a pathologist in Baltimore.
A gute Woche, a gute Chodesh, a guten Zimmer, Beruchnis of the Gashmir. L'chaim, L'vracha, Bach, I taught in Elena Melchei Lamshak, told me of his boy. If Rabbi Zippel didn't feel qualified to address the esteemed audience tonight, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to fall, but I'll do my best. Now, we've heard throughout the night that the purpose of the Farbrengen is to identify how each of us are influencers in our own right, in our own spaces, and our own environments. And in fact, my participation tonight and this very esteemed Farbrengen is very much a personal put-out moment for me. And what I mean by that is as follows. I wasn't scheduled to Farbrengen together with everybody tonight. I was hoping to attend, but not necessarily to share any ideas. But the Ma'agnim reached out at the last moment last week that they needed a substitute for one of the people, one of the folks to Farbrengen. And so hearing what the message of the Farbrengen was, that it was put out, that this was exactly the opportunity where I felt that perhaps I have to go out of my keva and out of my comfort zone perhaps and share some ideas. And that's why I'm here tonight. So now, Emma says we already heard from Reb Naftali an hour or so ago about the exceptional day of Chaf Ches Nisan, which Emma was until Chaf Ches Nisan Tafshin and Aleph. It wasn't really identifiable why it was such an incredible day. He further elaborated on the Hayom Yom of Chaf Ches Nisan and the relationship of the message in Hayom Yom to the Rebbe's strong message and the importance of this day in the calendar. But maybe I'll share something that maybe there's a little more to the story about the Hayom Yom Bichlal and Hayom Yom for Chaf Ches Nisan and its relationship to this day and how it actualizes itself in my life personally, and how others may be able to actualize it in their own lives. In a letter from the Rebbe Rayatz Nishmat Eden to the librarian Alexander Cohen, the Rebbe affirms that he should have received a small book, Hayom Yom, and it's a volume, as the Rebbe describes it, that establishes that every day says something, and that every day is a day. As a yeta tug is a tug. Amazingly, the letter that's written to Alexander Cohen is dated Chaf Ches Nisan, Tafshin Gimel. So the Rebbe on the day Chaf Ches Nisan Tafshin Gimel elaborates what the Teichen of Hayom Yom was for that day, and that the Sefer Hayom Yom establishes as a yeda tag is a tag. Every day is a day. And the Rebbe explains further that the message of Hayom Yom is emphasizing that Ahavas Hashem and Ahavas Yisrael are one. And curiously, if you elaborate in the shiurim of the day of Chaf Ches Nisan, you find that it's Sheni Parshas Kedoshim, in which the pasuk says, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha." All the teichen of one day Chaf Ches Nisan. If you go back to the basis of Hayom Yom, Chaf Ches Nisan, in fact, you find that it's in a letter from Tu B'Av, from Tafresh Tzadikei, and the Rebbe relates there the Alter Rebbe's response to Hasidim, questioning whether there were two forms of Ahavas Yisrael, and they approached the Alter Rebbe, and the Mittel Rebbe had argued that it was Ahavas Yisrael, the Hasidim that it was Ahavas Hashem, and the Alter Rebbe responded that it was Chakuk in every Neshama, Ruach and Nefesh, in every year, that there was one Ahava, and Ahavas Yisrael and Ahavas Hashem were one. And the Hasidim left that Farbrengen, the Rebbe goes on in the letter to say, they left with that message from the Alter Rebbe, and they established Farbrengen that it should be Chakuk, as the Alter Rebbe had said, the Neshama, Ruach and Nefesh, in each one of them, that this idea that there was one form of Ahava and they were connected one to the other. And the Rebbe concludes there that once it was engraved in those early, the Neshama, Ruach and Nefesh of those early Hasidim, that it was given over B'Yerusha to all the Deiros that followed. So no doubt, Chaf Ches Nisan is in fact a great day, as is Chaf Tes, and as we're going into Lamed and then into Iyar. But every day gives us opportunities, and each one of us have different types of opportunities and the types of exposures that we have to different people. Now, when we're dealing with individuals, when we're dealing with people, we're dealing with people who are vulnerable. Each one of us is vulnerable. Now, vulnerability for many was determined to be a bad thing. In fact, it's vulnerability that allows us to have Ahavas Yisrael, to have true love. Love emerges from complementing each other. And in fact, if Chaim Shmulevitz, Mir Sheshiva, in explaining the bracha achrayna, Bari Nefashis Rabbis Keches Reinan, why do we make a bracha? That thank you, Rebbeinu Shalom, for creating everybody with chesroinus. Because in fact, in creating each and every one of us with chesroinus, we need another person to complement us, to make us whole in a sense. And for this, we need to have Ahavas Yisrael, Ahavas Reim, and in that way we can be complete. There are very few fields in the world where people experience their chesroinus more than in medicine. in Mila as well. Because with Mayo, the chesaron is that there's an arla, and my job is to hasaras arla. But in each case, we're experiencing a relationship with another person who's finding themselves in a time of need. And as a physician, you step in and you try to help them navigate their time you help them navigate in their time of need, in their very vulnerable time and place. Needless to say, the last 2 years found many people in a very vulnerable place. And when people find themselves in a vulnerable place, for the physician, they find opportunity. Chalila, that the opportunity should necessarily be in the financial space. The opportunity is in the richness of helping another person when they find themselves in a place of suffering. And when you can help take somebody out of blotter, out of mud, and raise them up, lift them up to be more confident and more positive about what the future holds for them, it's a tremendous, tremendous, tremendous opportunity. I'll share a couple of stories where personally I found myself in my own Avodah Yom Yomis, where there were opportunities that being present, living in the moment, one was able to identify how to help other people in such a way that it emerges from an Ahavas Yisrael. And as the Rebbe taught us what Ahavas Yisrael meant, what being present means. And I'll share a couple of stories as such. So one story is as follows. I had the opportunity, I travel a lot to do Brisson, and a very kind gentleman offered to give me a ride to the airport. Needless to say, he took me to the wrong airport on an Erev Shabbos, which is not a great position to be when you're having to get back for Baruch Hashem, other local Brisson. So he becomes very anxious and very upset by the error. And I told him, look, I don't know that what you did is an error. There's some pu'ula that's intended to emerge from this. We'll see how this plays out. And I have no doubt that there isn't an error here. There's an opportunity here. And so he takes me to the proper airport. I board a flight, Baruch Hashem, everything is wonderful. And on the flight, the fellow comes over to me and offers to help me place my Miller kit on the overhead bin. You can't see me, but I am vertically challenged. And so any help in getting my bag up top was very, very much appreciated. And we sit there, we happen to sit down next to each other. We start to converse, and it turns out he's not a Yid. That emerged quickly. As a chassid of the Rebbe, if you're engaged with somebody, the first thing you want to know is, are they Yid, and what can you do to help them in terms of Torah and mitzvah? But as a matter of course, his children were Jewish. So we engaged in our conversation further, and it turns out that he had retired for a very particular purpose, for a very particular reason. He had lost his vision, and in his profession, without clear and accurate vision, he wasn't able to continue working. As it turned out, the disease for which he lost his vision from was for a particular type of cataract that I happen to know a surgeon who specializes in exactly that type of cataract. So that's number one. I missed the flights. I could help at this another person on a flight. And then it emerges that why is he flying to my region? Because his daughter is expecting a child. I ask him, Nunu, if your daughter is expecting a child, she's a Yidina. She needs a male for her son. Tells me, well, if you were giving birth in the city where you're flying to, we would potentially call you to be the male. But in fact, she's giving birth in the city where you're coming from, not where you're going. So there's no male there. So what can we do? I looked at him and I said, there's no male. In fact, you and I are leaving from the same city. Just like I'm coming from that city, I can go back to that city. And indeed, 3 weeks later, I was back there for a brit. Now, when you're first in that situation, when you're first in that circumstance, time seems to fly by. You're not present in the moment. There's anxiety rising. How am I going to get back home for Shabbos? But in fact, there were not only did I need to be on that second flight, that later flight, but that's from the beginning, from the start, that's how it was supposed to be. So being present and being available to somebody who finds himself in a situation, in a vulnerable place, and being able to help them out of such a circumstance is a tremendous, tremendous opportunity. Some of us have it every day, some of us have it more frequently than others, but in a sense, just being present, not being distracted by everything else that's going on around us in a 24/7 news cycle, just like there are Yedias in a 24/7 news cycle, there are also opportunities in a 24/7 cycle. And it's our opportunity and job to tap into those moments within that cycle and turn them into a tut alt moment. Now, when we think about tut alt, there's doing, there's tutan, and then there's alt. In medicine, there's this idea of, you have to be available, you have to be ready to do. Our goal is to do. But the question is it alt? Are we doing everything we have to do? Are we going above and beyond where we need to be? And the expectation is, as physicians, that you're available whenever patients call to do everything it is that they need. And in fact, throughout coronavirus, throughout the COVID-19 pandemic over the last 2 years, the cycle of phone calls was unending. And trying to be present, myself, my colleagues around the world, Askanim, Rabbanim, etc., it created unique moments because there were no longer this idea of office hours where people can come to you at very designated times, but every moment became an opportunity. And so, in fact, to share a story, there was a call one afternoon actually, about a Yid who was in desperate need of COVID-related care. Why it landed by me, I didn't know the Yid. I didn't know anybody who knew the Yid at the time, but somehow it landed up as an opportunity for me. Now, why was it my opportunity? Because I answered my phone. Had I declined the call, I didn't recognize the number, it would have been somebody else's opportunity. But by being involved at that moment and hearing the person's vulnerability at that time, we stepped into high gear and we interceded on behalf of the person and on behalf of the family. And we were able to deliver a level of care that I believe only emerges when we have a deep Ahavas Yisrael, Ahavas Reim. And ultimately that Ahavas Yisrael and Ahavas Reim should ultimately lead to the ultimate Ahavas Hashem, as was promised, as is Chakuk, in our Neshamas as Hasidim of the Rabbeim. And so, just to close out, when we're asked to do everything, each one of us has to slow time down, perhaps. We live in such a rapid cycle where so much is happening so fast. But how do you take every minute of every day and make it an opportunity to impact another person, another human, all of humanity, and ultimately, when we are synchronized to doing only good, to doing all things that positively impact a person who is in a state of vulnerability, and we complement each other in a most perfect way, then we're zeicha to a gula shleima v'amitis. And finally, in an aspect of the Sikha from Chafkas Nissen, we see a particular aspect in the way in which the Geula will be revealed. The Rebbe describes whether it is an Arenu Nefla'os or Nefla'os Arenu. And when it says Kimeteiska Mitzrayim Arenu Nefla'os, we're talking about Milamayla Lamata. So we beg, we plead that, as the Rebbe said, should it be one, should it be two, should it be three people, that are able to do everything in their power to bring Mashiach, but we see all the suffering that people are going through. We see all the challenges that people are going through. So we ask that it should be Milamayla Lamayla and should be Kimetes Mitzrayim Arenu Niflai.
Yashikeach, Reb Avi, but we're not letting you go yet. We perhaps did not do the proper introduction. We're dealing with a younger man who may not carry the badge of being a shliach, a formal position, a leader in a community, but yet we see the impact and the powerful influence that an individual has, a doctor in a very, very prestigious hospital, Johns Hopkins, and is infused with the urgency and taking on the responsibility. And those stories are very, very wonderful. Rabavi, if you could share something more, it would be very inspiring for all of us to hear how a so-called everyday individual can have such a huge impact in living the awareness of being a shliach of the Rebbe.
So the MS is, not to call out on any individuals, but the awareness of what it is to be a shliach of the Rebbe, to be part of the Rebbe's meisters, is a very, it was something I first saw up close and personal during medical school, spending many, many a Shabbos in the homes of shluchim, sleeping on couches by shluchim to be able to have a proper Shabbos experience during a medical school education. And so to identify a couple of shluchim that were most important and vital in being a dugma chai of what it means to be ibigigabin to the Rebbe's kach, to the Rebbe's purpose, Reb Chaim Grosbaum, Reb Tivya Teldin, Reb Adam Stein, Label Baumgarten, just to name a few, where I saw and appreciated was heißt ibigigabin. One of the aspects of medicine is that there's at the end of the line there's a life in play. There's partial to a person's well-being, and it could be a person's well-being from their little toe to Nebuch, the biggest krankheit. It could be anything that afflicts them. And so one thing that in medicine is to do a regular cheshbon hanefesh. Before you go to bed at night, you ask yourself, where did I leave my patients for the day? Did I forget something on behalf of one of my patients? Did I close out the day as it needs to be? And frankly, there's a pit in the stomach at the end of every day of what responsibility did I take upon myself as it affects another person? And can I go to sleep tonight knowing that I closed out the day and left everybody in a safe place? And so where you can see that in another framework is where you see the shluchim of the Rebbe doing their avodah. But there are times where I was just last week on a call with the shliach, and we were talking about the importance of regulating sleep schedules, that a normal sleep schedule is important to function. I only said that to him because I know what time I get phone calls from him. So seeing his Ivigigebenkeit, that it really is almost a 24-hour cycle that we're living in, is something that, he sees that he's dealing with neshamas, and therefore he can't sleep. I see that I'm dealing with people's physical well-being, which ultimately affects the neshamas and the expression of those neshamas, and that's why I can't sleep. My phone is a very curious device. It's you can actually map the number of phone calls per day, and they match the pandemic wave. They overlay perfectly on the pandemic wave. I ask sometimes people, it would be nice if you'd also call to maybe learn a sikha, it's also nice to get those phone calls, but the place where I am in, the position I'm in, is such that people need assistance and advice and guidance as a physician, and that's the position that I'm in, and that's what I have to answer to. And so many find themselves running away from the position that they're in and the opportunities that they're in. It's more of a question that the Rebbe puts forward to us is to make every day what it is to take the opportunities of that day. And as people have become wont to say in the last 2 years, if you have lemons, make lemonade. Don't seek to make some other thing out of the day that it isn't. Live the day for what it is, expand the day for what it is, and seek that every day should have opportunities that you can fashion and move forward. And so there are many stories over the last 2 years of interactions and how relationships among Hasidim totally changed trajectories of disease for individuals, for more than individuals. It calls to mind again, and it was an Erev Shabbos, where early in COVID, there were many who were intubated and were not being transitioned to other forms of respiratory support. And there was experience from elsewhere in the world that moving to those other forms would be beneficial. But working with Ahavas Yisrael, working among Yidden, Fernalekreisen, across all colors, shapes, and sizes, literally, it was an Erev Shabbos. Somebody got the bug in the ear that they were going to resolve this problem and reached out mamish across the country to identify the device that would help the doctors assist the patient. And this intervention was Pesach time of that year, helped every patient in that hospital that was in that state, and it affected them for the next month or 2 months, that they were able to implement a change in care. So Sa'ach HaKol is when the phone rings, somebody needs help, somebody needs assistance, your phone is ringing for a reason. You're being called to a mission, and you're not being called just to do in a halfway form and to let go and to move on, but you're being called to do everything. And that is a mission that every one of us in our own way can implement.
Yeah, Shekayach, it was really, really beautiful. I can't imagine how you would have left us without that. And again, on behalf of Chassidim all over the world, it's important to recognize Reb Avi was also very instrumental in guiding Moisdes during the difficult times of COVID and had a tremendous impact on saving many lives. And we wish him continue that tzlacha, and especially as he's a role model of what it means, what it looks like to being a real full-time shliach of the Rebbe. We're about to conclude the first segment of this international Farbrengen, and just as a wrap-up, we're hearing tremendous inspiration and guidance and advice from every segment, Rabbanim and Shluchim and Anshe Maisa, who are all sharing the idea that we all need to live that identity, own up to the empowerment that the Rebbe is giving us, and really seize the moment, maximize every opportunity and every interaction, so that we live in the vision of Lahavi L'Mais HaMashiach, and recognizing that each and every one of us is a key player. We are now at the finish line. This began the purpose of creation, purpose of existence, and now is the finish line when all the Shleimus HaKavon and B'riyas HaElamis is happening now and coming to its climax, when we're going to see this galus. The Rebbe will lead us to the Geula Amitis V'Ashlema, and the Rebbe wants each and every one of us to take a real active role in making that happen. I want to conclude with a story that I just recently heard here in Borough Park, and it's just a powerful story, what it means living with the Rebbe's words as a reality. This is a Metzias, and the Rebbe tells us it's on us. Geula is happening, just to live with that with perfect emunah through and through. So I went into a simcha. Someone was sharing a story that happened early in the Chafs in Crown Heights. It was a family that not Lubavitchers, and they were living down on Eastern Parkway, and there was a local grocery store there, and it was coming the time when people were leaving Crown Heights. There was violence, there was crime, there was holdups, and the community was dwindling. And there was a local grocery store owned by a fellow by the name of Anshel. Anshel was a Pashater Yid, and he was he davened in the Reima Huvim Shul, and he had a local grocery. What would the grocery look like? It was a small counter. People come in. It wasn't like aisles like today where you have a supermarket. and people walked in and asked for their bread, whatever it was. And he's describing this fellow who was, as a young child living there, is describing the supermarket, this grocery store of Anshel. So behind the counter, Anshel had some shelves, and on the shelves were cans of tuna fish, bumblebee tuna fish. He says, you'll soon hear why I'm describing the tuna fish. And one day, Anshel comes into the shul and he announces to the community, I'm closing my grocery. Why? People are leaving, there's a lot of crime, I'm afraid it's time to close. As he announces that, he hears a commotion in the shul, and people are sharing that the Lubavitcher Rebbe doesn't want people to leave out of Crown Heights. Anshel is a pasha to Yid. He hears the Lubavitcher Rebbe doesn't want, I'm going to ask the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He comes and asks for Yechidus to the Rebbe, and he asks the Rebbe, should I leave Crown Heights? I was planning to move to Staten Island, and here there's a lot of crime. I'm afraid, there's violence, there's holdups in the neighborhood. I'm very afraid. And the Rebbe told him, don't leave. And the words the Rebbe used was, "Keiner vet of dir kein shlita nicht haben." No one will have any control over you. Anshel took it. As the Rebbe said it, he comes back to shul the next day and he makes an announcement. And he says, my dear friends, change your plans. I am staying here and the grocery will continue to stay open. And it stayed open. A while later, one day someone walks into the grocery and makes a holdup on Anshel. He's holding a big gun, and he shows him that he has 5 rounds, 5 bullets. And Anshel stands there and ignores the fellow. Keiner vet of dir kein shlita nicht haben. The Rebbe's words are ringing in his ears, and he's confident, and he ignores the fellow. And the fellow sees that he's not taking him serious, and he shows him, I can shoot. And he pulled the trigger. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. Anshel is standing there stubborn, ignoring him. And a German Shepherd dog that was patrolling outside came in, heard the commotion, and took care of the fellow. And this person was telling me the story. He says, I and the entire community walked into the grocery, and we all witnessed 5 cans of bumblebee tuna fish dripping with oil of the 5 bullet shots, and Anshel walked out without a scratch. And Emunah Pshuta, in the Rebbe's words, gave him the confidence to stand up against all that looks in our eyes so real. But what was more real to him was the words that Rebbe said, and as we go on through our day-to-day activities, and there are so many things that look real, their voice and their sound is very, very, very strong, but yet there's something deeper, something so real to us that nothing can get in its way. Our confidence, our emunah b'tachan, davar echad midvarav loishav reikam, not one word the Rebbe ever said did not come through to its fullest. Everything the Rebbe said came to its fullest extent of clarity the way the Rebbe said it. And so too now, if the Rebbe is telling us it's here, and the Rebbe is telling us we're going to make it happen, and the Rebbe tells us each and every one of us carries the responsibility and the opportunity and the zchus to bring it a moment sooner, we are sure and confident that that will be the guiding direction in our life, the empowerment to make us all, for ourselves, for our communities, whether we can get them all to join the One Mitzvah campaign, or what, in any way possible, increasing our shiurim in Yanigula Mashiach, hearing the Rebbe's words, sharing the Rebbe's message, utilizing all of our opportunity of communication, our social media, for the exclusive reason that Yibishter created. It was only created that today we can flood the world with that message, inspiring, uplifting, and preparing every Yid we should see the Rebbe's galus before the end of this Farbrengen, and we should celebrate Rosh Chodesh Iyar in the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi Sheyibana b'Mheirav Yameinu Teikef Umiyad Mamish. We will now hear the Sikha of Chav Beis Elul Taf Shin Nun of our empowerment to transform the world.
Meise von der Ruf der alte Rebbe noch klarer, das wird verlangt, und es soll machen, wie die Welt im Misad Atzma, jeder Jid arbeitet dafür. Es ist auch damit wie ein Feld, was ein Feld hat in sich die größten Möglichkeiten, aber die Möglichkeiten in einem Feld seien behalten. Und wir darf haben, soll kommen ein Mensch, und der Mensch soll dort reinlegen Kernblech von Twu und Peris. wird das Dämmel davon auswachsen. Weiß, Chito, Seira, Geffen, Seina, Riemen, in sich Schemen und Dwursch, alle gute Peres, welche das hinkt ob der noch, der Lecher, der Eres, wie man nur tätsi Lecher, und welches hinkt ob den Menschens Leben, als darf doch umkommen, zu dem Mosen, was speist dem, kedei den Nishoma, soll sein a gesunde Nishoma in a gesunden Guf und dann gesunde Sachen in a gesunden Nefen, wo das ist verbunden mit dem Emerson gesund, wo das ist verbunden mit Aufführung, die Anweisung von der Terror, und man darf sich nicht schrecken, was Lechairi sagt, dass eine große Arbeit, bei mir echt nicht keine leichte Arbeit, ein Fieber machen von einem Feld, wie sie wird als Pitero angerufen, bestimmt Sode. Wie bald hat der Melch gefühlt sich im Feld, ist doch verstandig, dass wir gleich auf die alle, was gefühlt sich im Feld. Dies war nicht, weil Lachs kamen, wie kamen auf Menschen, was gefühlt sich im Feld. Und das ist doch ein Bichedischer Rachmim, haben sich die Tage in sich als spezielles Gule und Kirches, was machen noch leichter für jeden die Arbeit. Und wir können sein Schlichus, ein Fieber machen von der Felder, das werden Adire. Und für wen Adire? Nicht nur Adire für Stammer, Menschen und nicht nur für Stammer-Jiden, nur für die Adire, für den Melech Malcham Lochim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Und macht noch leichter die Arbeit.
Spending Pesach here together. At our program, we wanted to do a learning component, and we chose to use the curriculums by Tut Alts. I think that both renditions, the adult and the children's, are terrific.
I think this book makes it relatable in a way that I haven't learned it before, so it's nice to have it laid out clearly.
I like having the book because it's fun to learn.
I like learning from it, and I like new clean books.
As we conclude the first segment that was hosted at the East Coast, we take again the opportunity to thank the host of this grand Farbrengen, the Mashiach office of Suite 302, and all the amazing work they do that empowers and allows for shluchim and anash all over the world to really live with the Tut Alts, live within Yoni Gula Mashiach, and we wish them tremendous bracha and atzlacha in their monumental work in preparing the world for the Gula Amitis Vashlema Teikef Umiyad Mamish. We now have the great schus of turning over the host of the continuation of the Farbrengen all the way to the West Coast, one of the Rebbe Shluchim to Sherman Oaks, California, Harav Yossi Lipsker. A good Tavach and a good Chodesh.